one. Let me find Senator Webb. Right, Lucas, it was for this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me find.
Yeah, so if we can get him a link,
Yep.
we'll have him chime in when we bring his bill up. Or his piece, rather.
I also turned on the live stream already.
So just rolling through the roll call right now. See if we have everybody. Let's see here. Manish still in India?
Who?
Mahajan?
Yes, he still is. Yes, yes.
We had a few that were outside come back. Not here. It's not gonna miss. Let's see.
Senator Nazir.
Yes.
So this is your first time joining us. So on your screen, you should see something called participants on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
If you click that, because we mute everyone during the meeting, you see the yes and the no and the go slower. So the yes and no is how you'll vote. Go slower means if you have like an abstention. The go faster button is if you have like a point of order or a point of parliamentary procedure. The raise a hand, you'll click that if you want to speak. And then Michael will call on you, unmute you, and then you can speak from there. And when he called on you, just wait a hot second so that Mackenzie can catch up to take minutes. Is that cool?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, awesome. I'm gonna mute you again.
Okay.
All right, seeing as we're past time, I'm gonna go through for the individuals I had noted as not here to see if they showed up. And then we'll proceed forward from there. So give me a second to roll through them.
All right, so we're good on YouTube. And I think Kaplan's in, so we're good on minutes or presentation. Mackenzie's in, so we're good on minutes as well.
If you want to go ahead and pull up the presentation then.
Yeah.
Because I just rolled through everybody that wasn't here. Is still not here, but we do meet quorum. So I'll go ahead and kick us off if we're good to go.
Okay.
As long as you're all set on your side.
Yeah, I'm good on my end, and I think Kaplan's good on hers.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us yet again. in this virtual media that we have. I hereby call to order the 26th meeting of the 62nd session of Student Senate on April 15th at 6:36 p.m. So as one person I didn't check for was Odalis here. I know we had to swear her in the office
Oh, no, next week.
next week.
Yes.
Moving past that. So with roll, we just took that at the start, running through the list of names. So we do meet quorum with 25 total in attendance. Where a simple majority will be 13, 2/3 of present is 17, and 2/3 majority is 20. With that, first item is approval of minutes. Are there any corrections to be noted for the minutes that were sent out for last week's meeting? Seeing none, they will be adopted as such. Moving now into section 5, approval of the agenda. Are there any additional items that we would like to add to the agenda? A couple that I'm going to note from the agenda that I sent out to you all. SB-62-118 has been withdrawn from the author, from my understanding. And then resolution 11 has been reported out from academics. And so that'll be on the floor tonight for our review. Anything outside of those two that we need to discuss? Please raise your hand if you have one. All right, seeing none, we'll move forward, adopt the agenda for tonight. Making only not corrections, but additions will have to be submitted through a 2/3 majority vote in order to come through in accordance with Robert's rules. So with that, we'll move into public forum. Nobody reached out to me to express a desire. I don't know if anybody reached out to you, Gabe, but as far as I'm tracking, we don't have anybody.
Yep, that's correct. No one reached out to me either.
All right, so we'll move past public forum. And then officer reports have been submitted to the record. You should have received an email. If you didn't, let us know. And they should also be uploaded within Shocker Sync, so you can go there and review them at your leisure. If you have any questions about them, please reach out to the individual whose report it is, and they will be more than happy to answer that when they have time. We'll move into section 8, other reports. Likewise with the officer reports for all the committee chairs. We've asked that they all be submitted to the record and included within Shocker Sync for your review. Again, if you haven't not received it, please reach out to the individuals and ask for it. And again, if you have any questions about any of them, please reach out to those respective individuals and they will provide answers accordingly. As we don't have any more appointments, we're going to move past section 9 into section 10, unfinished business. Item A, SB-62-114, Continuity of Government and State of Association Emergency Act. And we tabled this one on its second read last time, and it has undergone a few changes in accordance with some of the discussions that were going there. And it was, to such an extent from one individual that we decided to remove our name for speaking on the Rules and Administration Committee because it felt more like a rewrite than our original. So we made that adjustment where that individual is now the author and we are simply sponsors of this legislation. But it was made as such to address the conversations that we had last time. So with it being so new, I'm going to go into a questioning period to ask any questions you may have for the author about any of the changed material. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get to you in the order they are raised. Kathleen, if you could zoom in a little bit. Senator Madden.
Yeah, I just have a point of parliamentary inquiry. Don't we need to adopt the amendment here?
So technically, no. So the author is going back through and adjusting as friendly amendments. Technicalities, yes and no. More leaning on, precedents that no, we've tabled bills and completely altered them in the past. And so I'm perfectly willing to accept that at this moment. But if you feel otherwise inclined, we can take a vote on whether we should or shouldn't. So with that, are there any questions about any of the particular changes or overall bill before we move into the debate?
Michael, would it be beneficial if Senator Mounts kind of processed the adjustments that were proposed or submitted? I don't know if it'd be helpful to present some of the information.
I think that actually, thank you, Gabe. That might actually be a little more beneficial, seeing as some of these changes were applied more recently. You may or may not have had a chance to look over it. So I will yield time to Senator Mounts, kind of briefly go over what was changed and why. Senator Mounts.
Yeah, so we, I guess in the first part of the bill, it is kind of like defining when this, I guess, when is state of emergency can be declared. So it lists three specific options there in 1.1 or 1.1.1, 2, and 3, and then it defines like who can do an association emergency. It goes through like the time frame, what needs to be included, what the executive branch will do, and what powers the president has. And then it defines what the emergency legislative council is. And then I know one issue and then one point of concern that was brought up during the last meeting was who was able to serve on the emergency legislative council. So we made it the chairs no longer serve as members, and the most senior member by years of service will become the representative for each specific voting block of the Senate. So that's who the council will be made up of, which I know that was one concern. And then it goes through the duties that the council needs to follow. And then senators, if they are still available, are able to attend the meetings of the emergency legislative council, and they don't retain voting rights. However, they will retain, I believe it was speaking rights and
procedural rights.
That's right, procedural rights. And then it goes through what the Senate will do, what the Supreme Court does, and then when the meetings must be held and how they must be held, and then how an extension or an end of association of emergency will happen.
Senator Kirk.
Yes, I have a question for the previous senator. So I just want to clarify, I'm not saying anything negatively, but so you amended, what the amendments that you did were very specific to who can do what, when this can happen, and then whenever, like who is in the committee based on seniority, and any senator that can attend is allowed to. However, they don't have voting rights, but they do have speaking rights, correct?
Senator Mount.
Yes, that's correct.
I can say one of the reasons we said that they would have speaking rights is one of the concerns was not having enough input from constituency bodies. And so while they're not there, they're kind of serving as an advisory role where they could still bring, this is what my constituents are saying about any particular issue or just issues in general. And they would still be able to voice that. And then the council would still be able to make decisions based on those. It's just who has the ability to vote affects quorum. And if all of Senate is able to be there and vote, then quorum would be the same as Senate. And this is to address when Senate can't meet quorum. So our quorum needs to be smaller. So that's why the voting went away.
Yes. I just wanted to say, first of all, that last amendment that you talked about, that was my biggest thing, and I just couldn't think of how to word it. But being able to give senators the ability to attend, and even if they don't have a voting right, like every college still has a chance to be able to be represented. I just wanted to say thank you, because that's what I was wanting, but I just didn't know how to word it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I actually had originally written the amendment where senators were able to retain voting rights, but because of the issues it presents with quorum, it was recommended that I take that out. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. So, all right.
Senator Madden.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. My first one has to do with what we're talking about right now with the whole voting thing. What do you think about the possibility, and this, I'm not bringing this up in debate because I don't have a particular opinion about this, I'm just curious what you think as the author. What do you think about the possibility of just having it so that all of the senators who do show up, even if it's not a regular senatorial quorum, they have voting rights and the power of the Senate is vested in them? The reason why I think of it that way is because there used to be a thing in the Constitution that actually was written that way, where it said that if Senate was unable to meet quorum, then the president can initiate a special session like right then and there. And during the special session, like the powers of the Senate were vested in the president and also all of the members present of the Senate. So you could potentially consider something like that, where you just have all of the members who are present from Senate have the authority right then and there.
That's how I originally had written it, and it was recommended because we would have to assume that to include all the senators who do show up, we would have to assume that every senator would show up due to the rules of quorum. And I don't believe that part of the Constitution is still in there. So because this is a bylaw change, not a constitutional change, it wouldn't, I don't think, be possible to do it like that. But at least that would be constitutional.
Senator Flores.
Oh, sorry. I just raised it when I still had questions about that, because it just seems weird that we would have people who are still able to be present, but we just take away their voting rights. It seems like there's no real reason to do that. But now that there's the explanation of the issues it raises with quorum, yeah, I guess I had that question answered.
I think really quick, Michael, before you continue. So there is a stipulation in the Constitution under Section 8, session of the session, that defines what a session is. And so there could be a question of constitutionality on whether or not and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't read the bill beforehand, so that's on me, but that's okay. But I think there could be a question of the constitutionality of the entire Senate convening when the Constitution specifically mentions that the Senate shall automatically convene in regular weekly session during the official academic year, excluding periods of official recess. The session shall be at a regular time and place, and which should be considered procedural matter. So I think this gives us, as I understand this, and Senator Mounds and other authors, please correct me if I'm not interpreting this correctly. I think this gives us a way to make sure that we're not violating the Constitution, which requires the Senate to convene only during an academic official year. And I think there'd then be the question on whether or not, if we had to have an emergency meeting in July, can the student body president require the Senate to assemble in July when it's not an academic year? And so I think this emergency legislative council gives us a way to do that. So that'd be a question that I would pose, not necessarily for us to answer, but a question I'd pose to the Supreme Court to determine the constitutionality of either one of those things. So I think this gives us a mechanism of how I'm interpreting it, a mechanism to be able to make sure we're not violating our Constitution in the efforts of having a Senate meeting when it's not the academic year.
Thank you, Advisor Fonseca. Senator Ritchie.
Oh, I had a question about Action 1, Article 2. I was just curious about how the decisions for the expiration dates were made. What was the reason behind that?
So 30 days usually is a great kind of like testing period. Try something out, see if it's actually needed. So basically, you can only declare up to 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it so, at the end of that kind of, my bad. Sorry. You can kind of, I lost my train of thought. Kind of like see where things are at after that 30 days and assess whether it needs to be extended or not. So I figured 30 days for the, declaration, and then can be extended up to 60 days after that. 60 days, or like, I think a full 90 days is kind of a good time that's where you completely reassess the situation. So they were a little bit arbitrary, but they were they fitted nicely, and I think it was just it was kind of what felt right to me.
Sure. Okay.
Senator Madden, did you have another question, or was that your hand still raised from before?
Yeah, okay. So the next question I have has to do actually with the constitutionality, because we were talking about not wanting to violate the Constitution, which is always good. But what I want to know is, how do we avoid violating the Constitution when the Constitution says specifically, bylaws can only be revoked by these means? It has specific rules for how you repeal them, and this overrides that. So is that not a constitutional violation? I'm curious the interpretation here.
You're speaking specifically on the lines where it grants the ability to basically not do away with, but suspend a bylaw, correct?
Yeah.
Advisor Fonseca.
Oh, that was a question. Was that for me or for the
author?
Mount or other friends?
Yeah, you could, sure. Do you have an answer? Do you want me to restate the question?
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Yeah, okay. So this bill gives people the authority to basically, temporary or not, revoke bylaws, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Constitution says that you can only revoke bylaws by blah, blah, blah rules and a vote in the Senate. So how does this not violate the Constitution?
Yeah. So I think taking a good old stab at it, and this is without actually sitting down to think about it some more. So please forgive if I sound stupid. I think as I would interpret the application of how we could utilize the Continuity of Government Act, I could think about the application in the sense that the term revoking maybe should be reconsidered and reevaluated in this bill, and to the sense of, you're right, the only way you can revoke a bylaw is by the full vote of the Senate. I mean, this goes into the very unique scenario in which Kansas is currently looking at with last week with the Supreme Court and the executive order that the governor and their legislative council looked like. So I think as I hear the line in the bylaws, I would maybe echo that we, use the term temporarily suspend, because the bylaws or the Constitution only grants the revocation of a process. And so I don't know if it would be unconstitutional for us to temporarily suspend. I think it's a very good question that should this piece of legislation pass, that we would ask our good friends in the Supreme Court to determine whether or not this bill is unconstitutional. I would make the argument if the term revoke stays in there, I would probably say that the court would deem that unconstitutional. I think they would maybe have a different discussion if it was the term temporarily suspend. So I think if we temporarily suspend the bylaws or statutes, I don't think we'd be violating the Constitution because it's still not going over. And I think with the implication of the language within the continuity of government, it's an effort for us to continue to establish what's in pursuit of the harmony of the association. It's how I would make the argument of how it's not. I think if anywhere in this bill the term revoke stays in there, I think that the court may say that's unconstitutional because you can't do that. I think they may have to think some more about whether or not we can temporarily revoke or temporarily suspend something. So I would say that would be a question for our court to have to answer. And I'd have to go back to see if they can preemptively review legislation before, or if they have to wait till something passes. But that's how I would look at it. And again, I think Senator Madden brings a point. The term anywhere in here that talks about revoking, I would imagine the court would have a field day deeming this piece of legislation unconstitutional. Does that maybe answer your question, Senator Madden? Okay.
I am changing that right now. Give me a second, and I will show you what the changes will look like.
Senator Ritchie.
That was hand from last time.
I see.
Okay. So Kathleen, I think.
I have it.
Oh, you got it. Okay. So, are you just putting temporarily in front of all three of the suspends?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll accept that as, I guess it's my amendment to my bill, so.
Senator Webb, you had a question?
Yeah, so including all of the representatives from each voting block, what's the total number of the legislative council?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Gabe. So each voting block would give us, was it 13? Right? And then you
Yeah,
have
so
the
13,
speaker
yeah.
I think,
and the speaker pro tempore, so it'd be a 15 total. And to give somewhat perspective, right now we have 30, so that's half of Senate in its current state.
it'd be.
And the total, I don't know what the percentage was. I think next session is 65 for total possible.
Yeah.
And so going potentially from a full Senate of 65 down to 15.
Yeah, so it'd be 15 senators, and then the advisors would also serve on it as well as ex officio members.
Right, but I think voting members would be the 15,
Mhm.
15, 16. And then now that the Constitution has been amended, the president of the Senate, so if there's a tie in that council, then the president of the Senate, who would be the vice president, would break that tie.
Correct.
Michael, I think Nancy has a break.
It's not letting me unmute her for.
Ooh, same on. Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Susie.
Advisor Loosely.
So I guess a couple of thoughts, folks, is I think we need to be cautious about writing legislation in the middle of a meeting, but also I think that we need to be cautious about interpreting the Constitution. That's the Supreme Court's job. And I'm hearing a lot of, well, this is what we think it means or what we think. And I think whatever the bill ends up being, we need to make sure that if we're asking for interpretations, that's the Supreme Court's job, not your all's job. And if clarification, that's where you can submit something to them. So as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm just cautious on making sure that we're not trying to interpret the Constitution on what we think, but really that's the Supreme Court's job.
Thank you, Advisor Loosely. Anyone else have a question for the author? Senator Madden, you still have a question?
Yes. Let's see. So, which one? Oh yeah. So, in this version, we got rid of revoking statutes, if I read it correctly, and we can only revoke bylaws. Am I correct in that understanding for starters?
Yes.
Okay. Follow up.
I see no other hands, so we'll go back to you.
Okay. So my follow-up question to that is, what are so like with the statute, like repealing statutes to me makes sense because I can see the practical use of like why that would be useful. If a statute is preventing you from paying cabinet members or running elections in a certain way that you need to because of an emergency, or running student fees and getting it passed in a certain way, which you can't do anymore because of an emergency, all of that makes sense. But if you can't change statutes, the bylaws just let you manage like your internal stuff. So what like emergency authority does this version of the bill give us that's useful in emergency situations, and how do you handle all of those other cases?
Senator Mounts.
I'm thinking. So, could you restate the question? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time following like what you're trying to.
Yeah. So, since this version of the bill does not let people repeal statutes like the last version did, then how do you what is the emergency authority that you're using here? Like, what does repealing statutes get you? Does that make sense?
So the way I interpreted it, both in the former bill and what at least I did here, the bylaws are the things that are kind of holding us back when it comes to like how we meet and things like that. So I think the ability of being able to temporarily like suspend bylaws affects the way that the Senate specifically, because this is more of to help, I guess, the Senate keep operating. In that case, it would help the Senate operate more effectively through the council, and being able to suspend certain bylaws will help kind of the other senators be able to do their jobs as well during something like this. Does that kind of answer it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So, but like what I would ask about is, if you're only handling bylaws, then like consider the situation of student fees. State of emergency, Senate can't meet for whatever reason, and you need to somehow pass student fees because that's necessary. How does this bill provide the means to do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Advisor Fonseca.
Yeah, I think the question Senator Madden is asking is most of the authority of the association is lives in the statutes, and most of the things in which we would need to potentially alter or suspend in the event of an emergency would live within the statutes. And so I think the question he's asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Madden, is that this bill only allows you to temporarily suspend bylaws, but doesn't give you any authority to temporarily suspend statutes if and when we are in an emergency scenario. So if we think about 3 weeks ago, when we had the first read of student fees, if for some reason we were already in the state of emergency, this bill would not allow us to process student fees. Then this bill would also not allow us to make amendments or changes to elections if we needed to. I think that's the question he's asking, that currently this only grants you bylaws suspensions, not statute suspensions. Is that correct, Senator Madden?
Okay. Yes, you are correct. It does not account for suspending the actual statutes. However, I would consider that a friendly amendment if you wanted to change that.
Yeah, I think that like that's definitely a direction to take it in, but I don't think that just tacking on statutes changes everything. So, but that's like further discussion that I'll have later.
All right. Any additional questions for the author before we move into debate? Senator Ritchie, you had a motion?
Just a point of parliamentary inquiry. This is still considered a second read?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Madden.
Okay, so for starters, I do think that this bill is like a good improvement on the previous version, which is always nice. I like the fact that this bill writes things in a way that's like much more succinct in its bullet points and just outlines things a lot more clearly in a lot of ways. So that's good, I think, and I think it expands on some of the details that we needed to see from the previous version of the bill. But I still think that this bill needs some work. There's a bunch of like little small things, like in 4.2.3.2, there's like a vote. So you have to appoint senior members to the Emergency Legislative Commission. But if there's like multiple people who are qualified as a senior member, then you can like the president of the Senate or the speaker, one of the two, they like choose which one they want. But then that choice has to be approved by the Emergency Legislative Commission. But how do you have a vote to approve the membership of the ELC without having the ELC chosen yet? So it's just like, and also like, what purpose does that vote serve if like it's an emergency situation? And that's like a very minor thing, of course. I think that the statutes thing is where we start getting into bigger problems, because I really think that the statutes are where our emergency concerns lie. If you're thinking about a situation where we're in such a serious, extreme emergency that like Senate can't even meet like we're meeting right now. So it's more extreme than even like COVID-19, basically. Then your priority is not passing legislation. And I don't think that passing any sort of bill is like something that we should be trying to create processes for. Like if there's a bill that's in the works and you're in a serious emergency, then that bill just isn't going to get passed right now. And you're going to have to pass it next session probably, or whenever the emergency ends. That's kind of how I view this situation. So when I see the need for an emergency action of some sort, a state of emergency, you need to be able to ensure that the absolutely critical things of SGA still happen. Do we still have elections? Do we still have student fees? Are cabinet members still paid even if it says that they're not working because of whatever rule or whatever? You know, we can ensure that that still happens. And so that's why, so I don't know how much inspiration Aaron took from this, but I sort of wrote like a very small draft of what sort of my version of this would be, and I sent it to him just so that he could look at it. And the way that it worked like this. So basically, the president is allowed to declare the state of emergency if ever Senate doesn't make quorum. In my version, the president had to like send out an email and get approval from people, like written response approvals, and then have like a majority of approval. But if you didn't want to do it that way, that's fine, because the main point of that way of my bill was that the president can revoke or can change statutes, but the president can only change statutes if the section of the statute that they're changing has a provision in it that says that you can change it. And you can also, in that provision, say how you can change it. So for example, if you wanted to change the election statute, cool, but you can't just change it that way. You have to change it, like the statute has to say, you know, this section can be amended with the emergency, you know, session provision or whatever. So you have to have something like that. That was sort of my version. And I felt like writing specific sections like that by basically pointing to specific locations where you're allowed to have changes gives a lot more, like, first of all, it reduces the concerns that the president would be overreaching power by just removing whatever statutes they want to. That's no longer a concern because now they're only changing things in the way that we wrote it to change. Also, it's not really repealing statutes in that sense, because now you're changing the statutes in a way that the statute specifically in its text said that you could change it. So that, I think, also reassures concerns about the constitutionality of your approach. Now, I'm not saying that my bill is like the greatest thing ever written and that you should just drop whatever you're doing right now and do that instead. But what I am saying is that I think that an approach like that, where we're more specific and subtle, would be better. And I think that at the very least, focusing on statutes in some way is essential. So with that, I would, so I'm going to motion, unless people want to debate further, I would motion to postpone this to the next meeting, especially since I feel like this is already kind of a first read, since it's a very different bill. So that way, postponing it, we can workshop it some more and get it to a version of the bill that I think addresses problems. And also, hopefully by then we can address constitutional concerns by reaching out to the court and at least getting like an initial opinion, even if it's not super formal.
So that would be a motion to table until next week. Scheduled meeting, which would be the 22nd, which would be our last meeting. Is that correct, Senator Madden? All right. A motion to table does require a second. Senator Flores with the second. I don't have my cheat sheet, but Gabe, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe tabling is debatable. And so we'll move directly into the vote. So if everybody could, if you are in favor, click yes. This would be in favor of tabling until our last meeting, which is the 22nd. If you are against, please click no. If you would like to abstain, please click go slower. And then table requires 2/3 majority, right, Gabe?
No, I think it's just simple.
Simple. All right. votes are in. So this motion to table until our last meeting, which is April 22nd, has passed, receiving a total of 17 in favor. 17 in favor, 3 against, and 10 abstentions. That pause was because votes were changing. Once the votes close, I will not accept any additional changes. So those votes will stand as such. We will now have this one tabled and bring back up for its second read on April 22nd. If you do have any concerns about any of that, please reach out to the author or the original authors. If you had something that was in the original one that you would like included here, please reach out to your fellow senators and talk about ideas that you may have and propose those so we can get any potential amendments out of the way before coming back. And that way we're not working on it there. I will remind, as it will be our last meeting, that if it doesn't go through, you can't table it any further, but you can, kill it at that point if you are unsatisfied with how it is.
Michael, really quick, can you repeat what attendance was?
Yes. So there's one person that I'm continually checking for because they have class, so it's when they pop in. But we currently have a total of 24 senators in attendance, which made simple majority 13, 2/3 of present was 16, 2/3 majority was 20.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll now move into section 11, new business. Item A, SB-62-116, Legislative Agenda Rework Act. And I will grant the floor to the author if they wish to speak about this particular bill. When I find your name, where did you move? There you are. Senator Madden.
Okay, so this bill is a long time in the making. I've been working on it for like a few months, I think, and I've had a lot of discussions with people about it, and so I'm really happy with how it turned out. But basically the idea here is that I wanted to change our legislative process because I felt like the way that our legislative process works right now, while it does, I see where the benefit is. But the problem is that the system of having to submit bills into Rules and Admin causes legislation to go under the authority of people where those people in those committees have a disproportionate amount of authority over the bill. And so I wanted to create a process where basically each senator has an equal voice and an equal vote in where legislation goes. So that's sort of the idea of this bill. And what it comes in the form of is basically rewriting the section of the bylaws that talks about the agenda for the meeting. So there's a lot of parts where it just sort of rephrases and goes into details on stuff. It goes in and it talks about public forum and it talks about officer reports. Something that we changed about officer reports is, just sort of to change how officer reports work under the new setup under the CARE Act. So basically, officer reports, you're going to have your Senate committee chairs and the speaker will give a report, and then the president can give a report, but the president is not required to give a report under this bill. That was part of a discussion in Rules and Admin. Basically, what we felt like was we wanted officer reports to take away as little as possible from meaningful Senate work with legislation. but we did want to give the president the opportunity to come speak before the Senate and take questions from the Senate if they had something really important to bring before them. So that's why we made like an optional president's report. And then the student advocate also gives a report here because it's in the student advocate statute that they have to give a report to the Senate once a month. So yeah, but the big part of this agenda is where we get into this thing called the business agenda. So after officer reports, you go into this section called setting the business agenda. And the reason why you go into this section is because you don't submit legislation in advance. There's no agenda that gets sent out in advance. So when you go into setting the business agenda, you're setting what business are we going to be, going through during this meeting is the question that you're answering. And the only items that are on the business agenda by default are unfinished business from previous meetings. So everything else, all the new business that you want to see, whether it be individual funding or org funding, or whether it be an entirely new resolution or a Senate bill, those all have to be added to the business agenda right there. There's no vote to add anything to the business agenda. You just say, hey, I have this resolution, and then it goes on there. During the business agenda, you can motion to add it into, add items into special sections, and I'll get into those later. But eventually, you have to motion to approve the agenda as it is. And once everybody votes to approve it, then you go into the next sections. And so the next 4 sections for business go like this. So the first thing that we have is the consent agenda. So this is just kind of a nice feature to have, and it's not really related to the core of the bill, but since I was at changing the agenda, I thought this would be good. So you add items to the consent agenda, and then the chair says, all right, I'm about to pass all of these by unanimous consent. Does anybody have any objections? And so this is for trivial bills, stuff that people, aren't really going to vote against or anything. So something like individual funding that isn't going to cause any trouble. We want to waste as little time as possible on those sort of non-controversial things so that we can move on to spending more time on substantive business and making amendments and having debates and all of that stuff. So that's why the consent agenda is there. If you object to anything in the consent agenda, so let's say the chair is like, all right, in the consent agenda, we have items A, B, and C. I motion to adopt all of these by unanimous consent. You can say, I object to item B. And then the chair says, okay. And then item B just goes into wherever it would normally go in the agenda. So you can still object to all of this like normal, which means that the consent agenda, having something in the consent agenda is never going to take away anybody's authority to have a chance to debate and vote on a bill. If you don't want to see something passed by unanimous consent, you don't have to. This consent agenda just makes it so that if you do want to see stuff passed by unanimous consent, it's really effortless and quick and easy, which is exactly what that's for. So the next section is priority business. Now, the reason why I have priority business is I was thinking about all the sections we have, and I was like, well, I should probably just get rid of appointments and call it just tell you to put it in new business, right? And then I was like, well, okay. So there's one reason why you would keep appointments, and that's because you might want to do appointments before everything else, because if I'm in the gallery, because my appointment bill is up, then, I want to, go up, speak on my appointment, and then once that's over, now I can leave the gallery, right? So that way I don't have to sit through the rest of the meeting. So you would want to put legislation in priority business, such as appointments, or the first read on a bill to recognize an RSO, or if there's just a bill that you think it's really important to focus on, right? Maybe you've got somebody in Senate who has a class, so they have to leave halfway through or something, I don't know. And so, they have a bill and you want them to speak on it. So you're like, okay, we'll put their bill in priority business. So that way their bill happens first, and that way we can handle that and get that out of the way. So the tool is open and there for you. You can just motion during the business agenda setting to put bills into priority business. And then the rest of it is just unfinished and new business, just as normal. But there is something that we changed about new business, which I really like. So what we used to do with when we were having discussions about like the purpose of rules and admin and why rules and admin is good. And the reason why rules and admin is good is that rules and admin encourages the use of committees. So we want to see Senate bills end up in committees more often than not, right? Because having bills go through a committee is good. It means that the bill is vetted and is of higher quality, right? But in doing so, we didn't want to, or, you know, I didn't want to at the very least, create a system that was inflexible, right? I didn't want to create a system where a bill could potentially die in committee, or where if I had a bill that was like written at the last minute, or a resolution that was written at the last minute and I needed to get it out right that day, I felt like senators should be able to do that. So that's why we didn't have rules and admin, but we did still want to encourage bills going into committee. And the question was, how do we do that? And the solution I found was actually in how we handle new business. Because if you think about a Senate bill that has a first and a second read, right? What happens with that Senate bill is that we go with a first read, there's some questions on the bill, and then just nothing happens. We don't debate about it, we don't make any decisions about it, we don't make any motions about it, and then we don't even start going into the possibility of motioning on that bill until the next week. So if you wanted to have it so that the Senate motions bills into committee, your lifespan for a bill would be first read, then nothing, then second read, then motion into committee, then bring it out of committee hopefully next week. So now your bill has 3 weeks that it takes. So what we would have rather seen was first read, then people say, okay, we like this, we'll take this into DEI committee, right? So then it goes into committee, hopefully only takes a week in committee, comes out of committee next week when it would have already been out for a second read. Now it's been through committee, and now committee reports it, Senate sees it for its second read, and then we vote on it. So what we did though is we felt like having, even if you said, okay, you can motion to put stuff into committee during the first read, even if we did that, there's a good chance that that wouldn't happen, because nobody's really encouraged to make a decision during the first read. The default action, the action that we're trying to discourage of just letting the bill go to a second read at the Senate, is an action of inaction. It's doing nothing. So what we decided instead was you have to make an affirmative choice about what you're going to do with the bill on its first read. So what that looks like is, if you have a bill up for a first read, you have to either motion it into a committee, or if you just want to have it not go to committee, but instead just go to Senate next week, you have to motion that bill into a committee of the whole. So that's basically saying, yeah, just do the second read like normal. And then you can also like motion to postpone indefinitely, or do something else that dispenses of the motion that Robert's Rules gives you access to. But this way, basically, you have to make an affirmative choice as a Senate to do something with that bill, rather than just letting that bill go through the process while everybody else is just sort of watching it happen. It sort of encourages the Senate to get involved and to get engaged into making a decision about what's going to happen to that legislation. And so we're hoping that that encourages senators to commit bills to committee more often. So that's the change there. Sorry, that was a really long-winded explanation of that, but I wanted to convey the intent behind it. And so that pretty much covers everything that we're doing with this. The other things that we do here is that questioning periods now have rules. So questioning periods have been a little bit weird because the Robert's Rules doesn't say that we can do them, and the journal doesn't say that we can do them either, but it doesn't say that we can't do them. So we've been doing them because it's tradition, but like, what if I wanted to motion to end questioning? Well, what does that motion look like? Well, we don't know, because there's no rules about it. And if I had a disagreement about what that motion should look like, what am I going to use to cite that disagreement? Oh, it says in this rule, except it doesn't say in that rule. So having rules for questioning periods is good and gives the Senate the authority to, make questioning periods look like how they want. It also gives the Senate the opportunity to change how they want to see debating happen. So we can already motion to limit debate, and you can motion under this bill to limit questioning, but you can also make it so that your debate time carries over to questioning by yielding your time to the floor. So the way that works is, let's say debates are 2 minutes, and then you get 1 minute for questioning after that. And you can have questioning after a debate, right? So a senator speaks in debate in negation of a bill, right? If you motion to give them 1 minute of questions, well, now the senator gets 1 minute of questions. But let's say the senator only spoke for 1 minute and 30 seconds. If they said, I yield my time to the floor, their extra 30 seconds of speaking gets carried over to their minute of questions. So now they have 1 minute and 30 seconds of questions to work with. So that's just like a little small thing, but it gives the Senate flexibility to set up debating and questioning to be like how they want to see it. And of course, if you don't want to do any of that, you don't have to make any of those motions, and debate and questioning can look like what it's always looked like for Senate. But those tools are there for Senate because I know that those mechanisms are really helpful. And I know that there have been senators like Senator Flores and Senator Mounts both went to Model UN and saw those sort of things happen in how Model UN ran Robert's rules. And they felt like it was really helpful in terms of making like a better discourse among Senate or among the people there. So I wanted to put those tools in there while I was making questioning periods a thing, so that way that exists for people to work with. I think that covers everything else. Oh yeah, as far as committees go, so committees cannot kill a bill, and committees can still amend bills though. So the way that it works is committees can amend a bill in committee by voting as a committee, and then they just have to report out the bill and say, this is the stuff we changed. They have to make it clear what stuff they changed, but they can't kill the bill, definitely. Obviously, they could keep holding it in committee if they want to, but it's a simple majority vote for the Senate to pull that out of committee. And you can do that in the setting the business agenda section. Let's see. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm open to any questions. I know that that was a lot and there's a lot in this bill, but I think it's really good for the future of Senate, and I would encourage everyone to vote in favor of it next week.
Thank you, Senator Madden. With that, are there any questions for the author? If so, please raise your hand. We'll get to you in the order they are raised. Senator Sanchez.
Yeah, I just want to hear, I think you did great at explaining what the bill consisted of, which I amend you for, because a lot of authors do not do this type of work. But first, I just want to kind of get a perspective as to what kind of influenced you to do this bill. I want to know exactly how to explain to my constituents how this bill came about, the story behind this bill. So I know you, like I said, you did a great job explaining the parts of this bill that I'll be able to portray back to my Senate or my constituents, but how did this bill come about? Kind of like the background story of it, please.
Yeah, so really you'd have to go back to last semester. I had like quit Senate at the time, but I was still hanging out with Rija, and we were talking about bills, and because we always talk about SGA stuff whenever we hang out. And Rija had said that there was a bill that I had talked with her about getting senators like shared drive access or something like that. And that bill got killed for reasons. And I think like hearing about those reasons, it's like, yes, I would like shared drive access, but those were good reasons. But what I didn't like was the fact that the committee killed the bill. And I heard about this in the fall, and I was like, ooh, I don't like that at all. Like, committees shouldn't be able to kill bills. So what I did from there is when I was in Senate, I knew that I wanted to work on that to some extent, to address that problem in some way. I met early in the semester with a number of senators. I think it was Senator Flores, Senator Day, Senator Khan, and Senator Ezell. We met at Fairmount and talked about this bill and some of the ideas that we would like to see. And that was like in the very early stages. And within the first week, I drafted up an idea of what the bill would be. And then we hadn't really made any progress until Michael and I got into our little bout during Senate. And that caused Michael and I to sort of get in discussions about things that we would like to see in the process. So then that became a discussion that I had with Michael. And I think Michael and I had multiple discussions about this. And I think Senator Mounts was involved in those discussions at least once. And then from there, I just wrote my rendition of the bill as it is in this version. And then I met, so Ways and Means had the bill, or sorry, not Ways and Means, Rules and Admin had the bill, and they invited me to speak on it. So I was able to talk about what I'm trying to do and to sort of ask them questions. I've had discussions with Gabe about it. And we just sort of bounced around different ideas and like sort of fine tweaked some of the things to just sort of make this work and to address everybody's concerns about what's important in establishing a legislative process. So this has been like probably the 5th or 6th rendition of the bill, if you can count my like old drafts. And so that's sort of how this bill happened, if that answers your question.
Any other questions for the author? Senator Sanchez.
Well, first, Senator Majors has his hand up, so he can do his question before I do my follow-up.
Well, so we were doing them in the order that you raised them. So your hand was actually raised before his.
Awesome. So I just want to know, and this might not be germane to the subject, and I'm okay with that. I just want to know why the senators you listed weren't on this bill didn't sponsor, or why there wasn't any collaboration involved with this bill.
Gosh, I can't even remember when I first wrote this draft. I do remember that part of the issue that I was having is that, so I typed up the initial draft, and my plan was always with these drafts to reach out to some of the people that I was collaborating with. And so I sent out emails of the initial version to people, but I didn't really get a whole lot of email responses back. So I think it was just a matter of like, we were not actively collaborating. And when I wrote this draft, it was just me writing it because I was like, I still want to make this a thing that happens. So nobody helped me write this, and I didn't reach out to anybody to sponsor it. I just wrote it. I don't know.
That's all right. Senator Majors.
Yeah, so first, you clarify that there'll be a completely new section, which is adopting the business, in which senators will be able to decide what business we go over throughout the meeting. I was wondering, is there anywhere in the legislation where you specify like the voting requirements? So for example, you said that we can amend, we can strike down, we can remove, add. Oh, where do you specify like the voting specifics as far as 2/3 majority?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. So if you take a look at towards the bottom of that, of the first action, 4.5.12, you'll see, since I introduced a lot of motions, I asked myself, like a lot of new motions throughout the course of that whole thing. And I asked myself, what would like, the like vote, like what would all the rules be for these motions? And I realized that they were all the same, except for like a few exceptions. So if there's an exception, the motion says there's an exception, but otherwise the rules are like that. So pretty much it's a simple majority. It needs a second. It can be amended. But I have all of these rules here because this is sort of the kind of descriptive characteristics that Robert's Rules gives. So those I think should answer for everything.
with a follow-up?
I do see no other hands, so we will go back to you, Senator Majors, for your follow-up.
Okay, so I also, you brief, or not briefly, it was not brief. You talked about the questioning period. I was wondering specifically about the portion where you say that you want to like have the eligibility to limit the debate, or limit the questioning period rather. So I know you said that it's kind of weird right now and, you know, kind of unregulated, but what was your specific reasoning for limiting the amount of questions? Just so we can move on, or I don't.
Yeah, so I did not limit the amount of questions, but what I wanted to do was give senators the options to limit questions. So right now, if I was a senator, right, and there was a bill going up, let's say that there have been 20 questions that have gone up on this bill, and I'm like, man, we are wasting a lot of time on just this one bill. I want a motion to close the questioning period, or motion to say only 5 more questions left, or motion to say only 5 more minutes on questions, or something like that. I couldn't do that because there's no rules about that motion. There's no rules about questioning periods anywhere. So I would have nowhere to refer to. And so somebody could say, oh, well, that motion requires a 2/3 majority. And somebody else could say, no, if you wanted to do a motion like that, that would require a simple majority. We would have no way to settle that dispute because there's no rules about it. So that's why I felt like it was important to write rules about questioning, because we do have questioning periods. So it's important to know like what the rules are surrounding them. Same thing with earlier in the session, we had a situation where there was like a questioning period that happened in the middle of a debate. And that questioning period was helpful, but it was also like sort of an interesting situation because it was like, whoa, we've never seen a questioning period in the middle of a debate. And suppose that I was a senator who had a problem with that for some reason. I would have no way to say, point of order, you can't have a questioning period here, because who says that I can't? There's no rules about it. So having rules there gives us the structure to sort of have those disagreements and those discussions and those motions. So hopefully that explains everything.
Senator Flores.
Hi, I was like wondering if I could like explain a little bit more on that, since like that was one of the portions I had like lots of input on.
So is this a question for the author?
No, Senator Majors, like his question.
So with there being no rules on questioning, technically, yes.
Okay.
Or is that a question for them or providing in further information?
I just wanted to provide information just because it was like, we got the idea from Model UN where you give your speech and then you are able to like answer questions, because like a lot of times in debating periods, someone like has a question they want to ask one person, but there's like 5 other people who want to speak. And so it sort of is like the conversation gets really jumbled. So if we just have the ability where you can just like ask someone the question right off the bat, it keeps the conversation like much more linear. But we don't have to do that. In all instances, it's just like optional, like for things that people want to like just sort of get clarification on from someone. You can just be like, here's my point. If you have questions, you can just go ahead and ask me now, instead of trying to like raise that point like later on when like 5 other people have brought up different points. And then because especially during the debating period, you can't ask like directly. You have to just sort of be like, here's what I think. And then the other person who disagrees is like, well, here's what I think. And then you just, it's so where you just cannot respond directly to each other is like what I think is an issue a lot of the times in debate.
So I was responding, one of our senators lost power at their house, so they're no longer in the meeting. They were just letting me know. So I was getting back to them, letting them know that they will be excused from the remainder of the meeting. But thank you for the input, Senator Flores. One thing I will note that's different with Model UN and the actual Senate and whatnot is their meetings are typically all day, whereas ours are there in the evening. It's usually meet in the morning, set things, have a break, discuss things, come back, at least as far as actual government goes, that's what they do. So ours is slightly different, but still good information for what it was based off of. And then Senator Majors, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, also, so like whenever you outlined the specific rules for all of the new types of motions, you said that they are not debatable. But like your section for, or your new section would include the eligibility to remove and add legislation. So do you think that it would like kind of limit the amount of time that we spent in that section if that were to be debatable, rather than, you know, simply just having someone add it and then having a form of debate come later and then it being disputed and eventually voted down and kind of lengthening the process?
I'm checking the text of the bill real quick. I do not think that you can actually remove stuff. You can add new items and you can change where items are by moving them from like unfinished business to priority business. But I don't think you can take it off of the agenda. And also it's worth noting that the motion to add a new piece of business to the agenda is not a motion that requires a vote. It's a motion that just automatically gets passed. So the reason why we did this is because let's say that I had a resolution that I'm bringing, right? So I'm like, all right, I want to bring this resolution forward. A bunch of people are like, I don't really like that resolution. We're not going to add it to the agenda. So they all vote no on the motion. So the amount of people that voted no is the same amount of people as the amount of people that it would have taken to fail that resolution anyways. And I think Director Fonseca and I agreed that it would be better if everybody had the opportunity to have their legislation appear before the Senate in the first place. So when it comes to motions to like adjust the agenda, when you're setting the agenda, there's no debate that happens there really. And I don't think that there's any reason for debate. Like you might want to debate about whether or not something should go to priority business or whether or not it should stay in unfinished business or something. But those debates, I think, would take a lot of time into a process that we don't want to take too much time. So that's another reason why we don't want to have debate in these motions, is because, you know, this should just be, what does the Senate want? Everybody votes to indicate what they want, and then the agenda looks like that as a result of it. No debate needs to happen because that could be drawn out, and this should be a process that hopefully is very quick and painless. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I kind of meandered with my answer a little bit.
Yeah, that covered it.
Any other questions for the author?
I think really quick to add on, I think the additional aspect with when it comes to legislation, I think one of the biggest parts about the authority and the power of the Senate and the privilege that the Senate has is to be able to introduce pieces of legislation, right? What makes it harder for a non-senator to introduce is that it requires the sponsorship of the senator to hit the floor. And so as we kind of looked at, you know, the rights and privileges of senators that you know, took the oath of office to be there, one of the rights and privileges is to introduce actions that are in pursuant of the harmony of the association. So ways to be able to mitigate not hindering that privilege. And it kind of works the same way now. So if I'm a senator and I introduce a piece of legislation, I would have normally have submitted it to Rules and Admin, and that piece of legislation would have been on the agenda at some point, or I would have used motions to bring them to the floor to bypass that process. So there's no step in the way to do that anyways. And so I think it's also just trying to settle some more in the privileges and rights that senators hold, and not infringing those in any way.
Senator Majors, you have an additional question?
Yeah, last question. So I noticed that, like, I feel like this is kind of a piece of overhaul legislation. I think that was purposeful. There are a lot of things that needed to be changed, so you put them all in this bill. I was wondering if you would at all consider splitting the vote, and if not, just explain why you think it's best to pass all of this together rather than on, because in my opinion, and I might be wrong and you can tell me why I'm wrong, but I think that they're fairly different things that we're like voting on in this legislation. So I was just wondering why we should vote on them all together rather than separately.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And I think I've had this addressed before. So basically the problem is that although a lot of this seems really similar, a lot of it is very, very tightly coupled together. So it's hard to split the vote because there's a lot of situations where passing part of it but not passing the other part doesn't really make any sense. So for example, we overhaul how we write. I mean, the main thing is that we were writing the part where we set the business agenda. Okay, so that's the core of the legislation. But while I was at it, I was like, okay, also there's a lot of vague language in how the agenda is sort of laid out. And I want to clean that up a little bit and introduce questioning periods too, because I want questioning periods to be a part of the legislative process that I'm creating anyways. And I felt like both of the questioning periods and the setup of this new agenda were going to be non-controversial things. Now, the things that might be more controversial are how Rules and Admin no longer, decides where legislation goes into committees, right? Okay, so that's a discussion that you might have. Now, you might want to take Rules and Admin out of it, or you might want to like take the Rules and Admin parts out of the bill and keep Rules and Admin where it is before, but that messes up with other things. It contradicts with parts of the bill. You might want to take out the part about questioning periods, but I mention questioning periods frequently in the bill. So it's very hard to take those pieces apart, if that makes sense. And, if you have a proposed way that you might take those pieces apart, I would be open to hearing it. But not to brag too much on myself, but I have a lot of experience writing legislation, and I put every single bullet point in here with like very specific intent. There's nothing in here that I put just sort of frivolously. All of it has a very, very specific purpose that comes from a good deal of understanding of Robert's rules and of our current journal and how I want this process to work. So that's something that if you want to still see that vote split happen, reach out to me. I would encourage you to reach out to me, since we still have another week before the second read comes along, and say, this is the part that I would like to see happen in a separate vote. And do you think this is possible? And if not, why? And we could have that discussion and sort of see where that goes.
All right. Any other questions for the author? All right, seeing none. As this is its first read, we'll move into debate and vote on this next week. And we will move into item B, SB-62-117, Emeritus Status Record Adjustment Act. As the author, I will talk a little bit about this one. Essentially what this does, while looking into what is emeritus status, what types of individuals get it, things like that. Going through the records noted that several of the previous sessions, practically all of them, if they did an emeritus status, it was done through a resolution. And as resolutions only exist, that's kind of a weird one, but they become void at the end of each session that cast them. And so technically anything that was granted within a resolution is also voided within that. So, but emeritus is supposed to be something that was awarded and then is maintained by that individual. So, taking each previous session at their word that these individuals deserve the right for this, this honor. Going through our records and noting everybody that was awarded through a resolution this particular status, and then putting it in a Senate bill, which remain until they are revoked by Senate. So restoring the emeritus status that would have been voided at the end of the session to the individuals that went through. And as you can note, there's like 12 different sessions that have done it thus far, and this isn't all of them due to limitations with getting access to the archives. I couldn't get everybody, so I'm also going to encourage whoever takes over for me in the next session to continue looking into it. But these are all the ones that I could find, and we're coming up on the end of this session, so I didn't want to wait and hand off a list. I wanted to go ahead and restore the status of those that I know have previously done it, and then have that search for others occur as we go on. But I do stand for questions. If there are any, I'm pretty sure this bill is pretty straightforward. But if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Senator Ritchie.
So I'm not 100% about 100% familiar about how the process of granting emeritus status works. But how does this solve for the future granting of emeritus status?
So this doesn't rectify the future. I mean, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, I believe it's number 13, does suggest that we keep a record. There wasn't one. There really wasn't a list to kind of reference who had, who didn't. You had to go back through and figure out, okay, this session awarded these people. And that was going through the records, not just here's a list that has everybody and when they were awarded.
Right.
While I was going through and finding these things, I made that record. And so this was just saying, hey, maintain moving forward. Here is a list of everybody that was done this way. You could add, either a 14 or within that particular one that moving forward, all emeritus status need to be awarded through Senate bill, but I don't think that one is kind of unnecessary due to the preface or purpose of this bill as stated existing, and you can always reference back to that of stating this is why you don't want to do it in a resolution and this is why you should do it in a Senate bill. That's why I didn't add a stanza. I figured you could reference that particular section of it without essentially ordering the Senate, you will do it this way. This is what happens when you do it that way. This is what doing it this way looks like and why you would do or not do either way. Does that answer your question, Senator Ritchie? Any other questions for the author? Is that still your hand up?
Yeah, so it's a follow-up. So if this isn't, if it's not germane, correct me please. But do you know how strictly we were following that before? Like, had we had what would have been what we thought were emeritus senators come in, would that have been nulled, or like how strictly were we following
So
that?
just for like clarification, when you're talking about how strictly we followed, are you talking about like how strictly do we follow the emeritus guideline of somebody that meets this criteria is who should get emeritus?
No,
Or-
I'm wondering that since these were technically nulled, if I'm understanding correctly, how did that affect their emeritus status? And does this like practically in a practical sense, like how much does this change things?
Yeah, so advisor for a second, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you go for it.
Okay, so this first came up when Michael and I last summer began the lovely task of conducting the journal review. And when we reread the section that talks about resolution, we had just come off of awarding emeritus status in the last session. And Stella Yang was reappointed temporarily to be treasurer for this session in the early summer. And we read something and we called her in and told her, you're no longer an emeritus because the session had expired. So I think in the past, I think people have just adopted the practice that a resolution is just that. It takes a stance and it makes a stance on something and assumed that the resolution would be suffice, right? And theoretically, if you wanted to look at it, it probably could. Emeritus status does have the privilege of that individual coming back to the Senate and utilizing the floor as he or she or they please. Theoretically, we no longer have any emeritus status or any emeritees or emeritize. I'm not sure the plural word for that because the resolutions have all expired. And so the hope of this piece of legislation is to correct the wrongs of our predecessors and to reestablish the privilege of the emeritus on behalf of them so that we are reassembling that right. So I think to answer your question, it was more than likely an oversight, and in full honesty and transparency, this is probably this is just kind of righting the wrongs and hopes that then future sessions would realize, oh, there's a Senate bill on this. Maybe if we want to introduce an emeritus, it needs to be done in a Senate bill. I think one of the conversations we had a lot this semester was defining what emeritus actually means. And so the hopes of engaging with the next year's leadership to be able to process that. But honestly, this is one of those, as we talked about earlier with the consent agenda, one of those like basic small things to just correct it and hopefully then encourages future stances that a resolution, if you want to bestow emeritus status on someone, it cannot be done through a resolution because that will expire the minute you pass it. Because more than likely they wait for emeritus at the end of every session, which means, 24 hours when the next student body president is sworn in and the next session gavels in, it is now useless. So does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Any other questions for the author? Senator Ritchie, do you have another one or is that just your hand still?
No.
All right, seeing no additional questions, and this does require a second read. So we'll move into debate and vote on this item next week. That brings us to our final item, item C, R-62-011, Fair Admittance and Performance Assessment Policy Recommendation.
I just sent the invite to Matthew Tucker, so it'll just take him a second to get on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
And there you
Senator Sanchez or Senator Flores have their hand up.
Senator Sanchez.
Point of parliamentary inquiry. So the previous bill about emeritus status, that was a bill, correct? Not a resolution. So I'm just
That is a Senate bill, yes.
So that's for the first read and then second read next week.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the questioning period is over.
Yes,
Okay, just verifying. Thank you.
not a problem. Senator Flores.
Hi, I had a question about a resolution I wrote. And then academics met yesterday and voted to move it forward.
And why it's not on the agenda. So that one's not on the agenda because it's missing several things. The copy that I received anyway is missing a title and it doesn't go to anyone, but it's recommending to the university. So there should definitely be somebody that it goes to, i.e. the president of the university, things like that. So there are key items missing, which is why I didn't add it to the agenda and was going to reach out to you. I didn't have time just before Senate, so I was going to grab you after to kind of talk over those things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So does that mean that we're not going to be able to like vote on that?
For resolution 12 will not be on tonight with it missing those pieces of information. But it will be made available for our last meeting, which is the 22nd.
But is it going to be able to be like voted on since it's just a first read?
So resolutions are first read, debate, and vote in the same night. So, and then we also have a clause that says if it is our last meeting and something does require a second read, then we have the ability to waive the second read and debate and vote on it that night. So we will be able to go through the full process by next meeting.
Okay.
All right, where did Tucker go? There you are. Matthew Tucker, thank you for joining us tonight. We just got into your bill for fair admittance and performance assessment policy recommendations. So you do have the floor to kind of talk about what this bill is and what it seeks to do.
Absolutely. So to begin, thank you for having me. The idea, the purpose of this bill is to kind of make access to university more open to everyone. What I mean by that is, well, let me step back for a second. Research has shown time and time again that standardized tests fail to predict in any way, shape, or form future performance of a student in university. Furthermore, research has also shown that standardized tests tend to have biases built into them. As a result, by removing the requirements of standardized tests, be it the ACT, SAT, GRE, all standardized tests, dropped, done. No requirement for them at all. By having those removed, what we're essentially doing now is expanding who qualifies to be a student at WSU. Furthermore, to the point of qualifying exams. Qualifying exams, for those who don't know, they're fairly common practice within PhD programs. They typically occur in your second year of a PhD program. And what it is a week of exams that cover entire subjects. So imagine being asked to memorize a book, essentially, and then during a week, test on that entire book. Do it to the next book and the next. So it's arduous, right? And it's arduous in a way that isn't necessarily, again, reflective of how a student will perform in research or in their program at large. It's very much subject to influences of test anxieties, etc. So the point of removing qualifying exams here, well, I shouldn't say removing qualifying exams. The point of having it optional to replace taking the qualifying exams with a thesis project or a thesis paper, it's to kind of open up those other avenues of options, of opportunities, to say, all right, I get it. Not everyone has, or not everyone doesn't suffer from test anxieties. Some people suffer from test anxieties, is what I'm trying to say. Because of that, why don't we go ahead and acknowledge this fact and acknowledge the fact that these qualifying exams don't necessarily show or prove a student is prepared for research, and instead allow them to substitute in this thesis project to account for that. And in that way, they are in fact proving they're ready for, in theory, research. And this is really the idea of the entire resolution. It's ultimately just meant to make opportunities more accessible to everyone. And with that, I will yield to questions.
If there are any questions for our author, please raise your hand. We will get to them in the order they are raised. Senator Webb.
So if I'm understanding correctly, this is applicable to both undergraduate and graduate admission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so I should clarify that a little bit. I don't know if everyone understands what the GRE is. The GRE is you have subject GREs and the general GRE. And what that is an exam, very much like the SAT or ACTs. And it's oftentimes used for admittance into different graduate programs.
Senator Webb, did you have a further question or was that your question?
Nope, that was it.
Senator Ritchie.
I have I'm still wondering how to frame my question. In committee, when we were discussing this bill, a few concerns came up, and I want to maybe get your what thoughts you have about it. So a concern that I brought up was the idea that and it's even listed under the first Be It Resolved clause, that these tests are being used as benchmarks, and the recommendation that we forego those without having another reasonable benchmark in place, just logistically and practically, is a concern that I think not only I would have, but students themselves would have, the people who are running admissions would have. So that's the first half of my question. The second one is concerning accepting master's thesis, the second Be It Resolved clause, where the Senate would formally request that that the university require all departments to accept master's theses as an alternative to qualifying examinations. And I guess I'm speaking more from a personal perspective. As an arts major and as someone who is in the performing realm, there's really nothing that can replicate something that's in the field in a performance. So you have people who are, master students in saxophone performance, right? They are required to have oral examinations and to have a graduate degree recital. And I think that accepting a master's thesis or a document that replaces that kind of defeats the purpose of the examination in itself. So those are really my 2 points, and I wonder what you had to say to that.
So I think you bring up a great point about that second Be It Resolved in particular. Perhaps it should be better to say when applicable to allow for a master's thesis. because you're absolutely right. Not all programs are created equally. And it's for that reason that I kind of wanted to open this up more broadly. And that's the whole point of this, is to create more opportunity. Insofar as the SAT, ACT, GRE requirements, the application process is already extensive. There are already other benchmarks that we do look at. The real point here is to say, let's be more holistic in the way we look at students. Let's not apply these standardized tests, which we know can be biased based on socioeconomic backgrounds, race, gender, creed, sexuality, etc. We know that these biases exist here. Let's not help propagate these by implementing the tests, right? So that was really the point there, was to say, go ahead and accept that these are flawed, drop them, and look at the student holistically. In that way, we're opening the door to opportunity up to more students. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Not to cut anybody off, but Senator Flores, you have a point of order?
I believe Senator Sanchez did, and I just wasn't sure if she was able to read the messages that Senator Zacharias sent in the chat. And I wanted to make sure that she had the opportunity to speak if she had something.
Senator Sanchez.
So my point of order was to the previous part, but if no one else has a question, I'll ask my question to this portion of the agenda, and then I'll go back to my previous question, just because I don't want to go past the order of the business we're pursuing.
So to understand you saying your point of order or parliamentary inquiry was for the item we just left, not the item we're talking about.
Yes, correct.
Mhm.
But I have a question for the item at hand, so I can ask the question with my point of order. Thank you to Senator Flores, and then I can go back.
Please do.
Okay, so to the current piece at hand, to Senator Tucker, I know I didn't have the availability to answer or to ask you this when you sent it via social media, but what do you ask for in the case that this resolution does pass? I believe it is a resolution, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's a resolution, what do you ask of the Senate and all the senators involved to do in the case that this does pass in order to best project this to the prospective students and any prospective graduate students that would be affected by this? And what do your future plans look like?
So, correct me if I'm wrong. What you're asking is, how do I think the Senate should best communicate the passing of this resolution and getting advisement from the student body at large? Is that correct?
Yes, although I might be incorrect, but if this is a resolution, then we vote on it tonight.
Yes.
So in the case that we do pass it and we are projecting this information towards prospective students like myself and many other senators, a few other senators, I mean, are student ambassadors. So we have constant communication with prospective students who are either applying or have applied and have been accepted to this university. How should we, as senators, do you see this piece of legislation? How should we translate this to those students, both the prospective ones and the ones who have been?
So the way I would translate it, the way I see this is a way of opening doors to everyone, right? Of saying, hey, look, for those who are already here, great. For those who would like to be here, let us make this a little bit easier for you. Let us help you get a little bit further along in your journey, in your academic career, right? Insofar as getting advisement of how this should be implemented down the road, what results should occur, that is a choice that I believe Senate will have to make on its own. I don't think that I am necessarily in a position that says I know the best, right? And if I'm understanding correctly, that is the question you're getting at, right?
Yes, I just want to know because a lot of the Senate legislation that's been passed to us doesn't necessarily outline that. And as senators, our duty is to advocate for students, and those being students that are on our campus now or are going to be on our campus later. And so the best way to do that is to ask the author, at least in the beginning, right? And then the way that we translate the type of information that you're proposing, then of course we can add our supplemental information. But I do want to know from the author themselves what we can do to explain that, because I just got off of a student panel earlier today, and those are times that we talk to prospective students, and I want to be sure that we know how to explain this type of information to them, being that they are affected either consequently or non-consequently.
Gotcha. Okay. So in that way, then the way I would translate this is that this resolution is meant to help students be more successful in their academic careers in two ways. One, it makes it so that the admittance requirements into university in the first place are more open, hence more opportunity, hence more success, more potential for success, I should say. The second is by removing the strict requirement for qualifying exams. And again, I do believe that this should be when appropriate, when possible. By removing that strict requirement and allowing thesis papers or projects to be used in alternative or in lieu of, this also opens up more opportunities for success. This says, look, we get it, not everybody tests well. For example, myself, I horrible when it comes to exams. The qualifying exams terrify me to no end. I am not looking forward to memorizing books, but if I were given the option of a thesis project, for example, that would be something that I would be much more comfortable with. And I know several other students who are in that exact same boat. And in that way, by offering this alternative, we're opening up that door, that option for opportunities, for more potential for success. Does that make sense what I mean?
Yes, it does help. I know you had reiterated some stuff and I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure that I asked the question in order for me to be prepared the best that I can be prepared in the case that I be asked the same question, or that students do ask, because they always do.
Right. Makes sense.
Advisor Fonseca?
Yeah, I think the one thing, Senator Sanchez, additionally with it is, it'd be a little premature to engage in conversations with prospective students about this, simply because the Senate, of course, doesn't have the authority to dictate the admissions requirements of the university. But it gives us some grounds to be able to, based off what resolutions do, they give us a grounds to say, we the students believe this, and so it allows us the opportunity to engage in conversations with the faculty senate, who ultimately we would need their support to do it, because we decide admission requirements holistically as well for the university. So it would be a little premature to engage in conversations with prospective students about it because of that. And I think additionally, as we talked about in the previous piece of legislation, this resolution would also expire next week, which the 63rd session wouldn't have the back to say, the student government believes this because it's a brand new session. And so I would also echo that sentiment of there's no way in a week and a half we are going to get a conversation, an engaging conversation with faculty about this. So a potential recommendation would be to potentially table and resubmit in about 2 weeks when the new session starts. But to answer the previous question in that sense of it'd be a little premature simply because it would be nowhere near prepared to do that.
And if I can follow up on Director Fonseca's comments just now, I would like to agree with him in that way, that I do suspect realistically what I think will happen here is if it were to be passed here tonight in Senate, it will get sent to the president's desk. The president will then send these recommendations back down to Faculty Senate and get their opinion on it. Faculty Senate will take probably close to a month worth of deliberating on this to figure out the details, the ins and outs. They will then make their suggestions to the president and the university will go from there. That's how I realistically see this occurring. Having said that, I do believe that it would be prudent to pass it now, and then in a week and a half, 2 weeks, when the 63rd Senate starts to meet again, pass it again, because if it passes the president's desk twice within such a short time frame, it will add to the urgency of this idea. It will let him know, okay, they're serious about this. Let's have a conversation.
Senator James.
Yeah. So are the amendments that went through DEI, I don't know if academics made any amendments, but did you accept those as friendly amendments or do we have to vote on those separately?
Let me read those really quickly here.
So all of the amendments that were made by the committees are highlighted in red and are already on the bill. Senate does not need to vote for them.
Okay.
The only one that's there is the more clarification was like a potential ask for maybe this one needs to be more clear as a note.
Oh yeah, can I speak on that on behalf of the committee?
What was that?
Can I speak on that on behalf of the committee to like let them know what we were discussing when we made that amendment?
For the more clarification?
Yeah.
Yes, please do.
So yeah, with this being both grad student and undergrad, we didn't really know how the master thesis works. So if you could like talk about it more in the resolution and explain like the benefits to, having the master thesis instead of a exam, that would make it more clear to any person that reads the resolution, whether they're undergrad or graduate.
So yeah, this is one of those areas that's not exactly clear until you get to grad school. I will agree with you on that. Traditionally, what happens when going to grad school, you have two routes. You can go master's and then PhD and potentially stop at master's, or you can go straight into a PhD program. If you go the master's route, it's generally the case that you will have some sort of subject exams, oftentimes 3 different subject exams in lieu of a project, or you can do a thesis project. However, if you go straight into the PhD route, you have to take the qualifying exams. And if you go the master's route, you have to take the 3 subject exams and the qualifying exams. Does that make sense what I mean?
So yeah, so you're just, instead of taking the exams, you just have a project or a paper that would replace that.
Potentially, you have the option of saying, look, the material that I'm being tested on in the qualifying exams, I've already taken classes on. I've already gone through the process of taking finals on this material. You're now asking me to memorize in great detail the books for these classes so that I can test on the material all over again after already having shown some mastery of the material. So in that way, it makes sense to say, why not go ahead and say, you've done it, been there, done it, we get it. You may not test well in the first place. Let's not trip you up on this. Let's give you the option to instead do some sort of a master's thesis type project in lieu of the qualifying exams. The catch to this, the benefit, one of the great benefits I see to this is, let's say you're a student who is on a research track. So for example, maybe you're in biology, right? And you get to grad school and you're unsure of what route you want to go. If you want to go a research oriented route or go into some sort of an administrative type route. Well, here's an opportunity for you to get some of that research experience to find out which route you want to go with your program. It also gives you a springboard of sorts for your dissertation. Maybe you go into a graduate field in chemistry thinking, I want to study PChem, physical chemistry, which is the quantum level chemistry. So here's an opportunity to say, let's explore this area, this topic a little bit. And I don't really actually like it as much as I thought I did. I'm going to go with my second option. Alternatively, you could say, wow, this idea that I thought I hated, I actually turned out to love. I'm going to go this route. So it opens up a lot of opportunities for self-exploration as well as research experience for students. It also opens up the potential for having more research papers published by students. So there's just a wide range of benefits. Like I really can't overstate why it would be more beneficial to have this allowed. Having said that, I do not believe that we should get rid of the qualifying exams point blank. I think we should have this as an alternative to them when applicable. And that's the whole point of what I was trying to get at. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Senator Majors.
Okay, this might be a little long-winded, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So I'm going to frame this question for you, so it won't be meaningless. But so I agree with attempting to limit the inherent biases that currently exist in the current system. My concern is just that the subjective qualification standard of the thesis is not preferable to the current objective standardized qualification. And so I'm just afraid that this could deepen current inherent biases. So my question is, who would conduct the oversight of the thesis, first of all? And in that same vein, if you agree with my concern, would you consider making this request to give students the option in the resolution? Because currently it says forgo all standardized testing requirements. Sorry, that's a lot.
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, the first point is with the qualifying exams, the qualifying exams offer in some way an objective way of measuring students' learning outcomes. Is that correct? Is that what you're getting at with your point about that?
Not even necessarily that, just more that the new form that you suggest could be just as subjective. Because I agree that there are some, it's lacking some objectivity due to, you know, socioeconomic issues or cultural issues. I do agree, but I just don't know that the new system would be preferable, and asking why you think that it would be preferable, I guess.
Well, in the point of the qualifying exams, those are usually, theses are usually done by committee and usually graded by committee, reviewed by committee. So it's not one individual looking at a thesis, it's several. And they have conversations about what they believe the result of that thesis is. Insofar as the standardized testing is concerned, the point of this is to move to a more holistic view of the student. It is too often the case that we sit down and we hear about students who they did poorly on the ACT, so they're not getting into school. That's a shame. That shouldn't ever happen. One mistake, one missed opportunity, a huge one in life, because I didn't test well. I had one bad day. That is what I'm trying to get us away from. That is the point of this. That is what I'm suggesting we should move away from. It is the case that that's all it takes right now. If we don't have a more holistic view of a student, well, the student A and the student B look almost identical, except A hits our ACT requirements, B does not. We're going to go with A and just throw B out the door. Why? Because they had one bad day? That doesn't make sense. That is wrong in every way possible. Furthermore, these exams cost money. The GRE is something like $300 every time you take it. The ACT, if I remember correctly, was like 120, 150 when I took it in 2007. So now we're adding further financial burden onto students on top of their university registrations and applications, which they have to pay for all of them. Now we're also telling them they have to take exams that they have to pay for. And these exams, if you're a poor test taker or you have one bad day, they have the potential of determining your future. That's not objective. That is moral hazard. And there is a huge difference between the two. You can have something be objective and right and objective and wrong, right? Like we're essentially saying that there is some sense of competition here that isn't necessarily equitable. And it's wildly prone to human error and just that human experience of, damn, this was a bad day. And that can be enough to keep you from going to school. That's wrong. And that's what my point is here. Does that answer your question?
Admittedly, it was kind of two questions, but also the second part was more or less whether you would consider, rather than foregoing in the amendment, if you would consider making it the option. So if a student truly believed that there were inherent biases in the objective current standardized testing, that they could have the option to instead submit a thesis.
Yes. That's, insofar as the qualifying exams is concerned, I absolutely think that's what it should be. That it should be an optional thing. That I admit this should have been written better. That particular be it resolved block from line 16 to line 18 should have been written a little bit more fluidly to say this is an optional one or the other. You can choose to take the qualifying exams or you can choose to do a thesis when applicable. Does that answer your question?
So in the interest of time, we do have quite a few other questions. We're going to move on to another question. Senator Ritchie.
Hi again. I have a question for you about other people that you've talked to, because I imagine like administration would have strong opinions about this, because not only are you trying to just change admittance requirements, right? But it's a cultural thing too. Like there's like the culture of testing. Like it's huge, and people are going to have to take the ACT and the SAT for probably 10 years. If, you know, that's assuming that the culture changes to a more holistic approach.
Right.
And my the real core to my question would be what would be the most preferable um, uh, uh, alternative? Because in the first be it resolved clause, um, would they accept, essays? Would they accept grades? I mean, because grades have the same problem if you think about it. Like the GPA, that's the same thing. So I'm not sure that there is still a substantive alternative that, still measures student outcomes, student learning outcomes. That's a benchmark that is like, I'm not sure if this totally solves for the problem that we have.
No, and I will agree with you on that, especially when it comes to like GPA, right? Because as you just pointed out, GPA is very, very sensitive to activities outside of the classroom. My own personal experiences with GPA, I've had a semester where people have died and mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and my GPA took a hit that semester, right? Like, things do happen. It's not the best measure either. However, just because we do not have an alternative that is necessarily substantially better doesn't mean that we should say the bad idea shouldn't still go, right? And that is the point here, is to say this is wrong, this is biased, this is wildly subject to human error and to biases. As a result, it is wrong to judge the qualifications of students off of this. Thus, we should throw it out. We'll figure out with time what better alternatives are, but we shouldn't continue to penalize students for these human errors. Does that make sense what I mean?
Yeah, and I have a follow-up question if you'll allow it.
Since we do have quite a few other questions, we'll have to come back to your follow-up. Senator Webb?
Just a quick question. Did you speak with either undergrad or graduate admissions officials about this beforehand?
No, because admittedly, no access to the university at the time, and I just didn't think to email them to ask. I did not, no.
Senator Ratcliffe?
Okay, so I was just going to add a little bit of clarification here for this, because I am actually in big support of this for the author. So I actually do have two motions to make amendments to this to help add some clarification to some of the points that he was making. And so the first one would be simply...
Well, Senator Ratcliffe, motions would come after the questioning period. This is a question to the author to ensure that you understand what the bill's intent is and what it is stating.
Fair enough.
But seeing as you do have a motion, when we get into that, you'll be the first that we call on.
Thank you.
Senator Ritchie, your follow-up.
Would an amendment to this bill that made the change from forego standardized testing requirements under the first be it resolved to forego GPA requirements, in my personal opinion, would be that you can retake the SAT and the ACT, but the GPA is really what I think may, and I don't have the data to back this up, can be a potential hindrance to students more so than the SAT, which they can retake. Would that be an amendment that you would be in favor of, or no?
With some changes to that particular idea, potentially. What my concern with is if your point about I can take this again. Yes, you can. You're absolutely welcome to. However, Some people are not financially stable enough to do that. So now you've just created a bias against people based on their socioeconomics. And that's, again, wrong. So yes, but no, right? This is one of the things that I think really honestly, the whole point of this is to say, like I was saying, telling Senator Sanchez when I was answering her question, what I see happening here is this getting sent to the president sending it back down to faculty senate, and faculty senate sitting down and debating this, talking about it, trying to come up with alternatives. What we see here is not what will be implemented. It will only be the match to start the fire, right? To get that ball rolling. So while I agree with you that GPA is a problem, I right now do not see an immediate fix to that without injecting other biases down the road. It is, if that particular issue is going to be fixed, it is very much the case that I believe will be fixed by faculty senate, who has the ability to sit down with their experience and say, this is what we can do. These are the things that we've noted on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense what I mean? However, I think by and large, we can all agree that the idea of standardized tests, it has seen its time, and that time is over. And as evidence of this, I would like to point to a trend right now being seen in universities all across the nation, both at the undergrad level and at the graduate level. Universities are starting to drop the standardized testing requirements, which is why, like I said, I targeted those as the point here. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome.
Any other questions for our author before we move forward into debate? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Matthew Tucker, for joining us and sharing with us, helping clear or elaborate on any of the issues that we had.
Absolutely.
So with that, we're going to move into the debating period. Does anybody have a debate at this time? And we do have one noted for Senator Ratcliffe, so we will go to him first. If the list stops moving around, and I can unmute it.
So my amendments specifically were on line 13. If you was to change after the word university, cross out foregoes and change that to has the option of foregoing. And these are just specifically to make the points that were made by the author earlier.
So this would require a second. You would like the second. There you go. Somebody said yes. Senator James with the second. Since it is your amendment, you have the right to speak first, Senator Ratcliffe, if you choose to.
So just like I said, basically is just a little bit more clarification for what the author was speaking to earlier. This basically just states that they don't have to absolutely do away with those assessments. This basically just gives them the option. And so that provides that flexibility that I believe he was making the points to earlier, because I would like to echo those important points, because I have also found out that I do have testing anxiety, so I can sympathize with the situation as well.
Thank you, Senator Ratcliffe. So moving into additional debate on this motion, Senator Webb.
On I thought I heard Senator Radcliffe say he had two motions. If he does have another one, then he can go before me.
Well, so we have to finish this motion before we can get to another one.
Oh, well, I don't have to speak on this motion. My bad.
Senator Majors.
Okay, so my only concern with this amendment is that it's placed wrong. I think that we should require, like, we are giving the university the option, which is what we shouldn't be doing. If we continue with the university forgoes all standardized testing requirements, then the university wouldn't have the option. But if instead, rather on line 15, we amended so that the student had the option rather than the university, that would give more room for the student to have the option than the university. If he knows what I'm saying.
I would agree with I would agree with that. I would not object with that.
Yeah, so I had the same thing. So I was going to motion to amend this amendment. So that line 13 reads that the university give the option to the student, the option of foregoing all standardized testing requirements.
Does require a second. Senator Cowden with the second. As it is your motion, we'll move into your debate first, Senator Ritchie. If you have an additional comment.
Nope.
Senator Zacharias.
So I would agree with this because, and I support this change because with students, the way it currently is, they either have to have a certain GPA or they have to have a certain ACT score. So in the aspect of providing students more options, let's say they have performed poorly in school because they had unfortunate incidents happen in their life. However, they did really well on their ACT and that gets them admitted to the university. I think we should provide more options for students to get in rather than getting rid of requirements just because the possibility is there that they may not meet them, rather than having the university have that choice to take it away, give the students the opportunity to choose what they want to do and choose how they want to meet the requirements that the university put forward.
Senator Flores, did you have a debate on this item?
I was just going to suggest that we motion to table this until next week, just because it seems like a lot of people want different things out of it, and there's a lot of language that seems to be needing
Senator
editing.
Flores, since we already have two motions, we cannot move to another one. The first motion being to amend, and the second motion being to amend the amendment. We have a maximum of two. And then if in order to table, we would have to be out of both of these in order to get to that. But if you do have a debate on the motions at hand, you do have the floor.
So yeah, I think that definitely like giving the university the option to forego, like, I don't know, it just seems very weird, and I just feel like it's gotten very confusing at this point. And I just think even with like all of these amendments, especially when we need to like amend the amendments, going on and like fixing the thing that's like fixing the original thing. I don't know, it just seems very odd to me.
Senator Ritchie, or is that your hand still up from last time?
I'm so sorry. No, that was from previously.
Senator Zacharias? Give her time to come back. Does anyone else have further debate on the amendment to the amendment? Senator Zacharias, you still with us?
Yes.
Was your hand raised from previously, or did you have another debate on the amendment to the amendment?
From previously, sorry.
All right, in that case, seeing no further debate, we'll move into the voting period. And again, we're voting on the amendment to the amendment, which is to change it to state the university gives the option to the student of foregoing all standardized testing. All those in favor of amending the amendment as thusly read and shown on the screen, please click yes. Opposed, no. Abstentions, go slower. Seeing no further adjustments in the voting, this amendment does pass, simple majority, receiving a total of 18 in favor, 0 against, and 12 abstentions. And so the amendment shall be amended as thus, and we will move into the amendment itself. Is anyone wishing to speak in debate on the amendment that has been amended thusly? Senator Ratcliffe.
Okay, so this is just to make sure I'm on the same page, where I would add my second amendment in correctly.
No, so since we voted to amend the amendment, we're back into your original amendment, which has been adjusted to read, instead of university has the option to, it now, your amendment now reads, the university gives the option to the student of foregoing.
Fair enough.
So that has yet to be voted on and inserted into the main item.
Just making sure. Thank you.
Not a problem. Oop, wrong person. Senator James.
With the motion to vote on the amendment.
So that would be a motion to close debate. Correct?
Yeah.
So motioning to close debate does require a 2/3 majority vote. All those in favor of closing debate, please click yes. Opposed, no. Any abstentions, go slower. This is I see no further changes to the votes. This motion to close debate does pass. It's 2/3 requirement, receiving a total of 20 in favor, 0 against, and 10 abstentions. Therefore, we'll move directly into the voting period, which is to amend the original bill as was just highlighted in yellow. All those in favor of this amendment, please click yes. Against, no. Go slower. For abstentions. See no additional changes to the vote. This item does pass with 17 in favor, 0 against, and 13 abstentions. Therefore, the main item, which is the bill itself, will be amended as thus. Senator Ratcliffe, this would be where your second amendment would be.
Fantastic. This one I expect to go much faster and have a little less time passing, hopefully. And so this would be line 16 after the words financial aid. And this is just simply to the point that the author made to Senator Ritchie's questions earlier with regard to the arts. And so it would just simply say when appropriate.
Does require a second. And somebody did. Let me see who that was. Senator Majors with the second. So with that, it is your motion. You have the right to debate first if you feel that you need to elaborate further.
I think it pretty much speaks for itself. I don't want to beat a dead drug here. And so in the interest of time, I actually would like to make a motion to pass with unanimous consent if I can do that, or if I have to wait for that, I don't know.
So I do see. Well, there has been an objection anyway. But so we would have to take a vote, but I do see, or I thought I saw hands, they may have disappeared for debate. President Miller, what do you have your hand up for?
So, Michael, you have to actually do that vote before you can move on.
Right.
So
all those in favor of this amendment, since it failed the unanimous, please click yes. Against, no. Any abstentions? Go slower. All right, so this amendment to the main bill does pass with 15 in favor, 4 against, and 11 abstentions. And the hand is now down. Senator Day.
Okay, so before I do this, I'd like to make it entirely clear that I am strongly in favor of the intent of the bill. I believe that standardized tests are overused in higher education, have had a very negative impact on making education accessible to everyone. With that said, I want this resolution to be in a less contentious and better state now than it was or in the future than it is now. I think the language is too contentious. There's too much disagreement, and I don't like that how much legislation has been done in the hearing. So I would motion to table this amendment to next week.
Table an amendment or the bill?
No, the bill, excuse me.
I was making sure that we were on the
Yeah,
same
sorry.
page. You're wanting to table this item until April 22nd.
Correct.
Gabe, if you could clear the votes, or at least I can clear them. Who was the first person? So first person I saw was Senator Zacarias with the second. As we mentioned earlier, tabling is not debatable, so we'll go directly into the vote. So all those in favor of tabling this item until next week, April 22nd. Please click yes, against, no, any abstentions, go slower. See no further adjustments to the vote. This motion does fail, receiving 7 in favor, 9 against, and 14 abstentions. So this will not be tabled, and we will move back into debate on the main item, which is the bill itself. Although I do see a point of order, so we will jump to that as soon as I figure out whose name that's on. And now it's gone. So with that, we'll move to Senator Webb.
All right, so I went ahead and emailed the undergraduate office, some people in there earlier today to get their opinions on it, because I know that doing this might put some extra work on them. So I emailed one of the representatives and Bobby Gandu, and I just want to read a little excerpt of what he said because I think it might shed some light on the effectiveness of this. So I'll just read a little paragraph that he said. I'm not sure that the resolution is necessary as currently worded. ACT, SAT scores are not currently required for admission purposes. Of course, most of our high school senior applicants submit ACT, SAT scores, but we can and often do admit students based on their high school GPA, courses, class rank. In other words, we are a test optional school that doesn't require ACT, SAT for admissions purposes. We do request it, and if provided, it helps us deliver a faster decision back to students so that they aren't waiting as long on an admissions decision. Note that GPAs/rank are also helpful to have, allowing us to provide fast admission decisions too. If a student doesn't meet our admission criteria, we then take a more holistic approach, asking students for more information about themselves and give them an opportunity to tell us more about their circumstances, challenges they've run into along the way, and why they think they'll be successful at WSU. So given that response, I think that this we already kind of do what this bill intends. Given, I will point out that that's only for the undergraduate. I have not reached out to graduate to see anything with that. So in addition, the other admissions rep that I emailed, she presented it to their meeting that they had today too, and the general consensus was kind of the same, but they also pointed out that ACT, SAT are used for financial aid, which was pointed out by DEI, I believe. And they thought that that might be confusing, that they don't need it for admission, but they will need it in order to receive scholarship admission. So that could create a bit of confusion for incoming students. So for that, I voted against tabling it until next week because I think that we should wait until the next session starts just to, one, have this more, I don't know, have it more established and not have to re-vote on it. And I think that more discussion between the graduate school would be a little more necessary to see what their current ones look like too.
Thank you, Senator Wood. Senator Majors.
I apologize, that was from earlier.
Senator Zacharias.
I'm just going to agree with what previous senator said. So currently we have it so that they either have to have a certain ACT, SAT, or they have to have a certain GPA. I think that's helping our students by having the option that they can use standardized testing rather than hindering them. However, for the GRE test, I'm not sure how they handle it, but they have to have a minimum score based on whatever year they took the test. And I think in that aspect, since they only have the one option, they only have to rely on their GRE score. I believe this would help in helping support students who maybe didn't have the traditional route of entering college. And I think this is important, but while it may not necessarily impact the SAT and the ACT, I think the GRE is something that needs to be re-examined. Also, with the point of graduate schooling, it is sort of like undergrad in the aspect, if they do not meet the standardized test scores of the GPA, they re-examine them and try to understand why. However, since graduate school is seen as more competitive, sometimes they fill up their slots before they have the chance to go back and look at that. So I think that while there are some parts of this that are asking for things that we already do, there are also new proposals in this that would help our students.
Senator Flores.
Yeah, I have lots of concerns that this would potentially confuse students who think that they don't need to take standardized tests like SAT or ACT because it's not necessary for admittance, without understanding that it could affect financial aid prospects. And just like students that otherwise would have taken it just won't take it. And it could potentially harm them in that way. Because then like, cool, like they're accepted, but then they don't have the ability to the ability to like afford college, because now they just don't have the financial resources because misunderstandings with regards to like the language, which I think is especially likely with people who this is most directed to sort of help out, like low income first generation students who don't really know how to navigate sort of like college and applications and financial aid, might just misunderstand things. And since that there are already options that like all like KBOR schools already have, this just seems, I don't know, a little bit unnecessary to me.
Senator Tubak.
Yeah, so overall, I agree with the sentiment of the bill. I think it's a resolution, I believe. Pretty much everything that it's saying about barriers to entry and all this stuff. We're actually in the Honors College currently removing or voting to remove our ACT GPA requirements. So I think we're ahead of the curve on that. But as far as the content goes, I think it needs more time. So I think I agree with the previous senator that we should wait till next session or refine it a little better. But that's all.
Senator Day.
This is just echoing what some previous senators had said. The part of the reason I introduced the motion earlier to table it to next week was, as other senators said, to kind of give it more time to work out. However, after hearing other senators, I do understand the argument that this resolution needs even more time than that. And I also feel that it would be more impactful if it was done next session, because we could say that's a current session working on it. So I don't know if anyone's working on a motion. If we vote on this, I'm probably going to abstain because I strongly agree with the messaging. I just think it needs more work.
So I guess my point again here was just that this is a possible option. And so that was simply to help encompass some of the ideas of what we face as challenges as graduate students, I think. So I think that's kind of the perspective from the author on this point. And so again, I just wanted to remind you guys that this is just basically allowing that as an option and not making it a permanent or necessary change. And so I guess I wanted you guys to consider that before you guys making any decisions.
Senator Webb, you have a point of order?
Yeah, I was just wondering, are we approaching the time of adjournment?
So the time of adjournment is set for 9:30 and it's currently 9:17. So we do have a few minutes left. Is that what you're curious about? You could extend if you would like to make that motion.
Yeah, could I motion to extend it to 9:45?
To 9:45. Has been seconded by, there you go. Senator Munson with the second. And then motion to extend is not debatable.
That's
So,
correct.
so we will move into the vote. All those in favor of extending this meeting to 9:45, you said?
Yeah.
Please click yes. Against, no. Any abstentions, go slower. All right, receiving a total of 19 in favor, 1 against, and 10 abstentions, this motion does carry. And our new time of adjournment will be 9:45. Moving back to the item at hand, which is debate on this resolution. Is there anyone still wishing to debate? Senator Zacharias.
So with a motion to strike how do I say this? To strike the material in parentheses on line 14. And then
Which part?
Could you repeat that?
to strike the material in the parentheses in line 14.
Oh my God.
And strike all in line 13. And add after the word all, general educational development scores and graduate record examination scores.
Ooh. One more time. General what?
Sorry, 1 second. General educational development scores. And graduate record examination scores.
Am I taking standardized testing out?
Yeah.
Does the amendment that is shown reflect the amendment that you are proposing, Senator Zacharias?
On the last word scores, please add an S. And then yes.
So with that, it does require a second. If you would like to second, please click yes. Senator Mounts with the second. So it is your amendment. So you have the right to speak first, Senator Zacharias.
So with the conversations that we've been having about possibly confusing incoming students by making them believe that they are not supposed to take SAT or ACT exams, the only ones that really impact and solely impact admittance are the GED tests that some students take before they enter undergrad, and the graduate record examination scores that the GRE that graduate students take before they enter our university as well. And so those are the real two tests that can be seen as sole purpose of admittance. And if we want to have it so that we are not solely looking at test scores to admit our students, I think those are the two targets that we should really look at.
Is there anyone wishing to speak in debate on the amendment at hand? Senator Sanchez.
Yeah, so with this certain amendment, I can see the perspective as to making it more general, but in accordance to this, there is a population serving that are current students, but most of this is prospective students. And even if they are current students, they are prospective students into our graduate or undergraduate programs. Therefore, a lot of 54% of our student body is first generation, and that only continues to increase. So the way that we generalize our information continues to dissatisfy the first generation students that we're serving on our campus. To take away the examples only takes away the knowledge of students, prospective students, and their course of pursuing both undergraduate and graduate studies. So I do seriously see the sentiments behind generalizing the statement. However, if I put myself in the shoes of many, 54% of our population, you're taking away the examples that so many of us, even you all as student senators, have in order to understand properly what general education development scores and graduate record examination scores mean. So, I mean, it seems like something minimal, but to a first generation with little, or international students with little education to the English knowledge or the higher educational system in general will not understand this. So this is a disservice to your constituents and to the first generation population at large.
Thank you, Senator Sanchez. Before moving on, I just want to make a note for those senators having conversations in the chat. As the chat cannot be recorded, that is in violation of Cora, and I would ask that you stop that. And we will move to Senator Ratcliffe.
Okay, so I apologize, but to address the comments that were in chat, it was just pointed out that you would have to include the GPA in that amendment to this, as well as the general education development scores and the graduate record examination scores, because GPA is also taken into consideration for admittance to graduate school. And so if you're going to make those two amendments to it, you would have to, in my opinion, consider making the GPA in addition to that as well. And I suppose with that, I should make a motion to add that to it.
You should. I was waiting for it. So that would take a second to amend the amendment to add the GPA requirement. And I see Senator Munson has seconded that. I believe you have already explained your motion, but if you feel it needs further elaborated, it is yours.
Where is it supposed to go?
Senator Ratcliffe.
I would put it in there with general education development scores, comma, graduate record examination scores, comma, and GPA. That's how I would word it specifically if it was my opinion. And having said that, I agree with the way that it reads, and I have nothing further to add to this.
Senator Ratcliffe. we're now moving into debate on the amendment to the amendment. Gabe, if you could highlight the amendment that we just made. Senator Zacharias.
So just to address what was said, general education development is the GED. It's the test you take if you do not get a high school diploma. Graduate record examination is the GRE, the test you take before you go to grad school. Those are two specific tests. They're not multiple scores. They're not multiple tests. They are specific tests. And so I guess to reflect that, I want to just say that we should capitalize those titles of those exams. Because there seemed to be confusion.
Mm-hmm. I see no problem with doing so. Senator Majors.
Yeah, I think that we should pass this amendment and then go ahead and try to vote on this legislation, because obviously it's not in favor to be tabled, and this seems like it addresses all of the inherent issues with the legislation, because according to what Senator Webb referenced, I think he said Gandu, I don't know if his title is doctor or not, but said that specifically we already have this option, so including GPA would alleviate that issue, I believe. And if we just vote on this simply yes, we can vote on the original amendment and then possibly find it into this legislation, or resolution rather.
Senator Majors. Senator Zacharias, is that an additional debate?
Yes.
You have the floor.
So I am going to vote against this just because grade point average is about as required as the SAT or the ACT scores. You get to choose which one. So I got admitted based off of my GPA. My brother, however, got admitted even though he had a 1.8 GPA because he had a 27 ACT. So it's not limiting our students, and I don't think it belongs in this because it's not the sole thing that they're looking at. For GEDs that students may have, those are the only things they're looking at. They're not looking at any other aspect initially. And for the graduate record examination, the GRE, they're also solely looking at that test score. There's not other tests or other things to look at. So I think that it doesn't fit there. And so I'm going to be voting against this adjustment.
Against the amendment to the amendment.
Yes.
Where'd you go? Senator Ratcliffe.
My counterpoint to that again would just be that actually for graduate school, GPA is taken into consideration.
All right. Any other debate? Advisor Fonseca?
Okay, y'all are gonna hate me, but you know, so be it. I think I'm hearing a lot of different concerns and questions and hypotheticals, but also what the university does, what the university doesn't do, conversations that or perspectives from admission. I think the one thing that concerns me about this resolution, and I still stick to the original thing that I said earlier about, I think this should be something that we just deal with in the next session and actually be able to do it then. My biggest concern with this is that I think there's a lot of confusion about what the university currently is doing for acceptance, about GPA requirements, test score requirements. I know that there was a conversation within KBOR, the Kansas Board of Regents, that talked about the requirements for admissions. I just think there's a lot of unanswered things that I don't want us to embarrass ourselves by pushing something forward that it's already a thing or that we just may have some questions about. I think we're trying to put a resolution forward that impacts two populations of our students, our undergrads and our grads, and we still don't have some specific perspectives of what those things mean. I think even looking at line 18 to 20, talking about more clarification in that area, I think oftentimes we see resolutions that don't lay it out, don't explain it, don't specify from top to bottom what it's supposed to be. And so my advice is I'm concerned that we're going to push something forward that we may not have all the answers to, and that there have been questions that have come up that either in hopes that the author or even our academics chair can follow up on to be able to provide some additional answers to some of those questions, to be able to put a resolution forward that clearly explicits the things that you all would like to see. And so my advice is to heed the recommendations of Senator Webb and address this in the next session, so that we can push something forward that is great, it's positive, it's 100% of what we need to be able to see and or do, and doesn't, and I'm using this word, and doesn't embarrass the association of things that are already a thing. We have heard they already look at this, they already look at that, they don't do this, they don't do this. And so that's, again, I'm gonna stop talking after that, but that's just, hopefully that made sense and then you all hear that. I don't want us to put something forward that isn't right and isn't correct, or answers to questions or questions answered that we don't have.
Let's keep to the debate to the matter at hand, which is the amendment to the amendment. Senator Madden.
Yeah, so pretty much the situation I feel like with this bill as a whole is one of two things. Either the bill is ready to be voted on and therefore ready to be potentially passed and we can send it out right now, we can vote on it, or we need to have a bunch of time that we spend adjusting it. And if we are adjusting it, then we need to table it, postpone it. So that being said, I'm going to motion to previous question
already
and call the
have-
vote.
Oh, yeah, never mind. That one can work. So to close debate on the item, if I heard you correctly. All right. So in order to close debate, it does require a second, which we have, which I see Senator Ritchie with. It is not debatable, and so we'll go directly into the voting period. All those in favor of closing the debate and moving on to the vote for the highlighted section, which is the amendment to the amendment, please click yes. If you are against, no. If you want to abstain, click go slower. I have to adjust. All right, so the motion to close debate does pass its 2/3 requirement, receiving a total of 21 in favor, 0 against, and 9 abstentions. And so we will move directly into the voting period on this amendment to the amendment, which is adding and grade point average. So if you are in favor, please click yes. Against, no. Any abstentions, go slower. And if you had already cast, I just cleared the vote, so you would have to cast again. All right, so let's see. Receiving a total of 2 in favor, 7 against, and 21 abstentions, This motion fails, and we'll move back to the original amendment as it was originally proposed. Is there anyone wishing to speak in the debate on this amendment? Senator Madden.
Motion to previous question.
Does require a second. Senator Day with the second. So all in favor of closing debate on this amendment and moving forward into the voting period, please click yes. Any against, no. Any abstentions, go slower. Receiving 17 total in favor. 17 total in favor, 0 against, and 13 abstentions. Does pass the 2/3 requirement. And so we will move into the voting period on this item. And it has been cleared, so please cast your vote for the amendment to this resolution, which would be, which Gabe has highlighted currently, which is the general education and graduate record examination. If you are in favor of adding this amendment, please click yes. Against, no. Any abstentions, go slower. It's 21. So receiving a total of 8 in favor, 2 against, and 20 abstentions, this amendment will fail. And we'll move back into discussion on the resolution itself. Is there anyone wishing to debate further on this resolution? Senator Zacharias. Where did you go?
Sorry, I put my hand down.
Okay. That's why your name jumped all over. I couldn't find you. So the next person with their hand was Senator Madden.
Motion to previous question.
This would close debate on the entirety of the resolution and does require a second. I see a few there with Senator Zacharias being the first I note. So with that, this does require 2/3. All those in favor of closing debate and moving into the voting period on this item, please click yes. Any against? No. Any abstentions? Go slower. Go back to the original. That's 15. Seeing no additional changes, I will assume those that weren't cast in abstentions. So we do, this particular resolution does pass its simple majority requirement, receiving 16 total in favor, 1 against, and 13 abstentions.
No, that was just to end debate. So now you have to take the vote
Right,
to
right.
approve the resolution.
That's right. Let's go back to the wrong part. So 16. What was it? 16, 113. Yeah, and it still passes the 2/3. So debate is closed, and we'll now move into voting on the resolution itself. So I'll clear the votes and please cast your vote. If you are in favor of this resolution passing, click yes. Opposed, no. Any abstentions, go slower. See no additional movement in the votes. This item does fail its simple majority requirement, receiving only 2 in favor, 13 against, and 15 abstentions. And seeing that our close time was 9:45, and we have only 3 minutes, unless somebody would like to extend the meeting.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Senator Madden.
Is it possible to add a new item to the agenda at this time if we were to extend the meeting?
Only if somebody extended the meeting, as we do not have the time to go through another item.
Okay, I motion to extend the meeting to 10:15.
So adjusting the time of adjournment does require a second. And that was second was Senator Zacharias, the first that I see noted. So all in favor of adjusting the time of adjournment to 10:15, you said correct? Please click yes. Any opposed? No. Any abstentions? Go slower. And then Gabe, just to make sure that I've got it right, because I still don't have my cheat sheet, fixing the time of adjournment is simple majority or 2/3?
Simple majority.
That's what I thought. So at the current votes cast, receiving 12 in favor, 3 against, and 15 abstentions, it will pass, and our new time of adjournment will be 10:15. And one item that I was going to recommend is Senator Flores did have a resolution that it was missing some items. They have emailed me that with the completed portions. And I assume, Senator Flores, you would like to make this a motion to add to the agenda?
Yes, I would like to motion to add, I believe it would be R-62-012, I believe. I left it blank on the one that I emailed just because I was unsure, but I think that's what it would be.
Yes, so the current one we would be on would be 12.
Okay.
So in order to add something to the agenda that was already adopted by the Senate, it does require a 2/3 vote of all those present. So if you are in favor of adding
Do
an
I have
additional,
do I have the ability to like explain like why it should be like brought up or like what it is first?
so precedents would say yes, the rules would say no. But we currently do have it up on the screen for those interested in voting. We'll just have a
They
list.
can only read like 5 lines of it.
So with that, all those in favor of adding an additional item, and the voting period for this time is going to stay open a little while to allow you to read through this particular item, as it was a last minute add. If you are in favor, yes. Against, no. Any abstentions, go slow.
I think it's ready, Michael.
You still haven't scrolled down to the other parts, as I've noticed. But at least I had multiple. Well, no, that's just who to send to. Never mind. So this item to add, receiving a total of 16 in favor, 2 against, and 12 abstentions, does meet the 2/3 requirement, and we will add it to our last item as item D under new business. However, with the statute that is in place, any resolution that is added shall be automatically discussed in the next one. I forget exactly which statute it was, but it happened in a previous meeting. The Senator Man was trying to add something. Gabe, do you remember which statute it was?
It's our record statute.
Yeah. And so this item will not be voted on.
Point of order. The statute in question says that it has to be sent out 24 hours in advance, which it was.
It was incomplete.
On it.
But was it given to the Senate? To me, it was. To the Senate, it wasn't. And the Senate needs 24 hours. And it wasn't sent out to the Senate because it was incomplete. That's where
Was it not
that's
sent
where the
out in
catch
an
goes.
email?
So I didn't send this one out. I don't recall sending it out. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Senator Zacharias.
I was hoping the author could speak on this bill for the Senate.
Yeah, that's why I was just not going to allow voting, but still having questions so that we would understand what's going on, and a brief overview from the author would still occur. We just wouldn't be entertaining it until next meeting. So with that, where'd you go? Senator Flores, if you wanted to talk about your bill.
Okay, hi. Yeah, like I'll make this really quick. Obviously, the pandemic has affected everyone in terms of like living situations, jobs, the ability to attend classes and like the quality of education that people are receiving, because like obviously like professors weren't prepared to transition to online classes, and that's not their faults, but like it also isn't students' faults, and it shouldn't reflect that on their grades. I wanted to discuss this like right now. One, because like I think that questions that I had and wanted to discuss with like the academics committee yesterday, we talked about the pass-fail course system that you can like opt into, because that's what I saw like a lot of schools were doing when I originally wrote this piece of legislation, was doing the pass-fail system. But then since I wrote that, I've seen a lot more articles coming out about universal pass and a modified ABC system, where it's like an A is 100 to 80, a B is 79 to 60, and a C is 59 and below. And then there's just no D or F grades, or a universal pass system. Because I do know that there are lots of questions that people have, because a pass-fail or the credit and no credit that the faculty senate currently is proposing, the credit no credit, a lot of students reached out to me and were like very concerned, because either they register for credit no credit, and specifically like med school students and other students who want to go on to higher educational practices, if they take a class for no credit, then they have to retake the course, and then that's just wasting a lot of money for students, especially because there's lots of students who are just facing like very, very, very serious hardships, like homelessness or lack of like complete loss of income, or literally being in like different time zones, especially like international students who have moved like halfway like across the world and now can't go to their Zoom meetings. And I know a lot of people have been saying that their professors are accommodating, but we shouldn't assume that's the case for everyone just because of our own personal circumstances. So the be it resolved portions where it talks about from 18 and below, 18 to 25, like those lines where it talks about the pass fail course, I am open to making amendments where we change the sort of system that we have, because I did have a student who emailed me, who I had never spoken to before, who told me that she'd seen my piece of legislation, and instead of a pass fail, could we do a universal pass system where people are just unable to fail? And we've had lots of discussions with I've had lots of discussions with people. I've researched a lot. I've had discussions with the academics committee, and I just sort of want to hear other people's perspectives and questions that they may have. Because I do know that concerns about artificial inflations of grades, if we do universal pass or the ABC system that I was discussing before, where people will just stop trying, that is a concern. But what I think is a bigger concern for me is the fact that students, especially those that are from low income and marginalized backgrounds, are going to have to drop out of school, or are going to lose scholarships, or just have to spend thousands of more dollars for something that is not their own fault. And so while I do think artificial inflation of grades is a concern, a bigger concern is students failing and losing all of these opportunities that they had previously. Sorry if that was long. Open to questions, other comments,
So one question that I have is I know that Faculty Senate is already taking a look at this. Did you reach out to them at all when devising this, or is this to help their efforts or what?
I did not reach out to them because I've just been really busy. Like I've been working like around 40 hours a week or more, like every week. So that's just like not been a possibility for me when I've been trying to like schedule like meetings and courses, like trying to do my own homework. Like it's just been something that isn't possible for me, but I have had lots of students reach out and show lack of support for the credit, no credit system.
Senator Zacharias?
So I was just hoping you could explain the difference between pass or fail and credit and no credit. A lot of the assumptions are that they're the same thing, that they just have different names, but they are very different. And so I think the Senate should be informed on that matter.
Yeah, okay, so like the credit, no credit system, from what I understand, it would also be something you can opt into. Like you can choose like your course to be credit, no credit. From my understanding of what the Faculty Senate has done. And so it wouldn't be that you fail a course and it wouldn't negatively affect your GPA. But you would just not get credit for it, but you would still likely have to retake it if it's like something that's required for your major or for like med school, law school, like lots of those different things. You have to like retake the course anyway, which is like spending thousands of dollars on classes that they've already paid for and then just happen to get, you know, messed over by because there just happened to be a pandemic. And if the pandemic hadn't have happened, then like they would have done great in the course. And so that's like my perspective coming from it is I think there is greater harm that would be done if we did the credit, no credit or pass fail system than like a modified like ABC system or universal pass, just because there is no way to like measure how students wouldn't have done, and we shouldn't expect to measure them under the same light in like a global pandemic, like emergency situation. So pass fail, like a pass fail would still like, if you get like a 59 or below, that would still like show up as a fail on your grade. But if you get anything higher, it would just register like as a pass, I believe. I'm not sure about like the numbers, but that's essentially how it would work, is that if you get a fail grade, it shows up as an F. If you get a passing grade, it's a P. But credit, no credit, like one is just like you get the credit for the course, but then still there's still some issues with that, if that makes sense.
Senator Reckler.
Okay, so I just wanted to add here, and maybe this will help add a little bit of clarification as well, because there was a meeting this afternoon that had Dean Hipsley on it, and this topic came up specifically. And so I took the opportunity to ask a few questions about this. And so they have been talking about this amongst the faculty and whatnot. And so they are basically saying that students enrolled this semester will have the opportunity to enroll in a option to basically either have their classes be applied as they are this semester, so they can either keep the A, B, C structure they have now, or they will have the opportunity to do a pass or fail system or a credit, no credit like you're referring to. They did, however, not refer to the exact numbers or that any of the structures would be changed. And so I don't know that those ranges would be widened at all. But they did say that, so for example, if you have a specific GPA this semester, the pass, no pass, or credit, no credit would not specifically change your GPA based off of those courses that you enrolled to be eligible for the pass, no pass in. Anything that you are still enrolled in a class 4 that is on a regular grading system will still apply to your GPA. So that might help shed a little bit of light on the situation, a little bit of clarification. And so just, I would encourage you to probably maybe connect with Dean Hipsley and them on that, because that possibly would add a little bit more clarification as well for you. So.
Senator Zacharias.
So with the Faculty Senate currently recommending the credit, no credit, if you have a C- or above, that would give you credit in the class and it wouldn't affect your GPA. However, if you had a D+ or below, it would come off as no credit if you chose that option. And then students can choose if they want a letter grade or a credit, no credit grade. With the pass fail, typically it's anything that's 50% or above is pass, 50% and below is fail. So I think that would help our students a little bit more. With this currently going to the provost from the Faculty Senate, I was just wondering, Michael, if this is considered a timely bill, because I thought we had somewhere in our bylaws that if it was like a timely resolution, that could be voted on in the first meeting.
So there's that, but you still have the stipulation for the 24-hour access. Senator Madden.
Yeah, so actually on this matter, so if you take a look at the statute on records, in the part that it says that resolutions have to be sent out 24 hours in advance, it says that if the Senate is provided with less than 24 hours to review each resolution, the resolutions will be tabled to subsequent meetings, except in the case of extraordinary circumstances. So I think this particular resolution would qualify as extraordinary circumstances and therefore could be immediately voted on.
On what grounds?
Because it's timely, because if you don't push this sort of change, then it'll be too late for it to affect students at all, because finals are coming up. So you need to push the change now.
So with the change already being pushed by Faculty Senate, that's where I'm coming in with, why is it important that we push it if the university is already pushing for it?
Because it's a different thing. The pass-fail system is different than credit, no credit. And I also wanted to discuss if we should change to a if like this should be amended to a universal pass system, or like the ABC modified system that like Wiley College is doing. And a lot of like Ivy Leagues are doing just like a universal pass system as well. And so I also had that, and like I do think it needs to be like, regardless of if we changed that or not, I think it should be voted on, because otherwise like we will not get a say, because those decisions will already be made by next week.
Thank you for the input, Senator Flores. Next time, please do wait to be recognized. Senator Madden still had the floor to answer my question about his matter of determining why this would be timely. Senator Madden.
So is the chair making the interpretation that this is not an extraordinary circumstance that would allow it to be voted on now?
So me personally, I'm not quite seeing it, which is why I was asking for clarification. But I do see your hand up, Gabe, so you have the floor.
Yeah, so the statute Senator Madden is referring to stipulates the following reasons for extraordinary circumstance. The last meeting of the current session, last meeting of the semester, cancellation of the subsequent meeting, late notice of an urgent matter pertaining to the state legislator, or late notice of an urgent matter pertaining to Wichita State University. It then continues, in the case of any such extraordinary circumstance, the Senate shall debate and vote to override the 24-hour rule regulation outlined in section 7, paragraph 710, with a 2/3 vote excluding vacant seats. So in order for it to happen, you would have to debate, close debate, vote, and get 2/3 vote in order to bypass the extraordinary circumstance stipulation.
Yeah, that works for me. So Senator Madden, I'm going to take that as you making that motion. And we're going to move forward. I'm going to assume there is a second. Yep, there's Senator Flores with the second. So with that, now open the floor. Senator Madden, it was your motion. So you have the right to debate first on why we should forego the 24 hours.
Yes, so I think that this resolution, you might think that this resolution is unnecessary if you're somebody who's listening to the debate that's been happening right now. If you think that's the case, all you have to do here is vote no on passing the resolution, and then we're good. Or you could debate on it right now. Either way, there's not really any use sending this resolution over to next week, because the time is now for this resolution to either pass or not pass. So I think it is urgent, and I would encourage everyone to vote yes to override the 2/3 or to override the 24-hour stipulation.
Senator Ritchie.
Moreover, I'd like to add that the action from Faculty Senate is sitting on Provost Muma's desk. So if we're going to kind of voice our support if we pass the bill as is, or the resolution as is, then now's a window of opportunity. And if we wait until next week, then he might have already put this into place, and our time will have been wasted.
Senator Webb.
Yeah, a student just wanted me to voice whether this sways your opinion or not, that the last day to drop with a W is, I believe, this Friday, the 17th. So I don't know if that helps in making your decision or not, but just wanted to make you aware.
Well, so it's the Senate making the decision, not, which is why I was fine with it. I just wasn't seeing it, and that's me.
Yeah, that's what I was.
If the Senate feels that is something they need to do, we do have the mechanism in place, which is what we're following to do that.
Yeah, I meant you as in the Senate.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Senator Ritchie, is that still your hand up from there, or do you have another debate?
No.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in debate? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take the vote. All those in favor of overruling the 24-hour requirement, please click yes. Against, no. Abstentions go slower. And then I will remind our time of adjournment is 10:15, so we only have a few minutes to get through it if we do pass. And Gabe, you said it was a 2/3 majority or present?
It says with a 2/3 vote, excluding vacant seats.
So that would be 2/3 majority. Thank you, Gabe. All those in favor? So knowing that we have more senators in attendance than 18, and we have yet to meet the requirement, on any of those wishing to not abstain, please vote. With 5 minutes left on the clock, I see no reason to stall, even though we're pretty close. So with a requirement of 2/3 majority, we needed 20 in order to pass, and this currently has 19 in favor, 0 against, and 11 abstentions. So the motion to overrule the 24 hours fails, and we will table this bill until next week. With that, and saying that we're coming up, unless somebody wanted to extend to have additional discussion about it. That doesn't work because it's automatically tabled to next week. So we'll move into remarks and announcements. And we have 4 minutes to do so. So if you do have one, keep it brief. Senator Sanchez.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to give a quick thank you because you are all the first that I give to do this to, considering that I've put my full devotion into these last Senate meetings in this session. So I'm almost so certain that all of us have been intact with the previous election. And so I just want to give the thank you to everybody who supported and voted, regardless of the option. I think it's super important that we continue to follow SGA. My time in SGA has been amazing, and I think that's evident to my campaign and to all the endeavors both inside of SGA and off of SGA. And I want to really extend my gratitude to you all, because you all are some of the influencing forces as to why Courtney and I ran. So I want to give that thank you, and I want to give a big congratulations to Regia and Mackenzie. And I hope that all of us senators continue to hold our next elected officials accountable the same way that we do these elected officials, and our local, state, and government and national officials the same way that we continue to do so every single day, especially in times like this. So I have to go, considering that I have a lot to do. Campaigning was definitely not the easiest thing to do in my life. So I have a lot to catch up on. I just wanted to make sure to really express those sentiments with all my heart and do that so that I can get to my homework. See you guys.
President Miller, and we have 2 minutes left. President Miller.
Oh, can you hear me? I realized my phone was on mute.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I just want to really encourage everybody to read the article that the Sunflower wrote about the Faculty Senate's suggestion of credit, no credit, the class-by-class opt-in program. There's a lot of different things addressed within that article, so I highly recommend you all read that, as it is extremely important when making decisions on that resolution next week.
Thank you. Seeing as we're 1 minute left, if there's any other remark or announcement right quick. All right. Seeing none, we will adjourn. Or Gabe, was that a hand or?
No, it was really quick. Senate leadership, I need you all to stay, so don't hang up.
Thank you. So we will adjourn at 10:14 p.m. With a silent roll call. Thank you all for tuning in and joining us. Tune in next week for all the things we tabled and any additional